Oh, we turned on the camera
I'm gonna go
probably.
online and check the web.
Mathematics, 6 through 12, October 2nd, a.m.
But then when people moved to her district and they said, oh, yeah, algebra, and then in your algebra class, we're going to figure out how to do algebra. I'm sorry, sweetie, you gotta move. So it does help that.
Who's that? Oh,
I'm going
yeah, they're
online
meeting
to see,
later.
they said there was a meeting in traffic accident on the ice.
I do that.
Semis, like
They're
had
saying-
blocked.
Right, so I'm just gonna see.
I guess I need to go to.
But I thought that was middle of the night, Kathy. I didn't think it was this morning.
Well, somebody said
I
it
thought
was
they were
still
still-
going on this morning.
It was.
Make sure we weren't going that way, because she said it was.
Yeah,
Still.
well, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Do you?
And how many do we have that are coming from? Julie's coming from the Kansas City area. I don't know if there's anybody else up from that area or not.
I think Anne's over by St. Louis, isn't she?
Ann's from St. Louis and Lisa's
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
Yeah.
Princess Deborah, she's from Kansas City.
Lisa's not coming.
Deborah just emailed said she's not coming.
Lisa's not
Lisa-
Lisa's not coming.
Yeah, Lisa emailed and said she wouldn't be able to make it.
I asked her.
Dr. Fred's not on our group anymore.
He is
Well,
now on our
he
group.
is
Yeah.
Oh, he's on our group again.
Yes, and even though we haven't started, I can tell you this because it's not against the rules. I spent about 25 hours trying to contact, particularly Tim Jones' office back and forth. I probably have, I don't know how many phone calls and how many emails back and forth, them changing who it was. And then they give me a name, and I'd call them and I'd say, so I'm gonna invite you to the Dropbox, because you weren't here last week, you know? And they'd say, oh, I was there last week, I'm on elementary science.
So they're
Right.
on the wrong place.
And then two of the people that he gave me, the names weren't spelled correctly, and all he gave me was a city, but I did contact who I thought it was on one of them, and, I got a note that says he's dropping out. Well, hello, here's a sign in, not trying to brush him out. But Laura,
If you get,
I mean, you're fine.
if you sat down and got comfy, then you have to get right back. Yeah. Are you, is it still raining outside pretty hard?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, I just figured that God's gonna send us a rainbow again today.
A double rainbow,
That's what I'm hoping.
a double rainbow. But Nancy, do we know if Fred's gonna be here?
Fred did not say whether he was gonna be here or not, but I'm sorry, I meant to pull that up and you know I have ADD or something, old age or something. But my last email from Chris Howard, who was doing the appointments for Tim Jones, the last one said that first, he had told me that his appointment for education was Dr. Young Chok Chin,
Yeah.
which I thought was Dr.
Oh,
Young
yeah.
Chen Ching.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
But I didn't want, I thought it would be pretty insensitive for me to just assume
Soon,
that he called.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
I wrote back and said, are you sure?
Yeah.
And then he said, or could you give me contact information, is what I said. Then he changed it and said that Dr. Chung would no longer be on, so I
Okay.
think that's Dr. Chok Jun,
Okay,
/ Chen, would no longer be on there, but Fred would be replacing him.
Doesn't Fred teach chemistry though? I'm just.
I think he teaches multiple things, doesn't he teach multiple
Yeah, but he has a
things?
strong math.
He teaches science and language.
And has he taught
I have
2
a question
years
there,
from
too,
now?
so they probably read it.
So
That, I don't know his personal
Their
history.
hands went to-
Yeah, I'm, like news artist. Osage Beach became a preschool. Yes.
Oh, you sleep in your own bed?
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I just have one and she's 17, I just feel.
Is everyone else online?
I finally got there.
Yes.
And that,
15 minutes.
I once did
There's a page you have to accept and you open your browser.
I know where I teach for State for community college and things were online. And it's so where you, but I didn't like
And so I was gonna be there and say,
we had
Choose those songs that you want.
just I skipped down.
Oh, no, I didn't print them off either.
And I don't know which one, because there's so many boards. Well, I thought, I said, change this. I said, what do you, give me that, I'll say, like, that's right. Who was this? That was great.
They realized they've got a shirt that's higher than just it's a member floating in society.
Usually.
And I also found
We're ready.
yeah, we got the
Thank you.
Look at that, and they'll buy some.
I just checked it. And I just as soon as she comes back, we'll go
How long do you think we're meeting?
He just knows
We know
you.
anything about lunch? Since we
Karen
have a
has it.
facilitator?
Karen has it. So, because we don't know the food nurse better than Jefferson County.
What did you say,
Well,
Karen?
that's good, because parking's worse.
I'm on the
Yeah.
parking's much worse, food's better. That's the program.
Yeah, it's like
And I-
way down
So-
the park. 2 blocks away. It's normally when you do that, it's raining.
Nancy, I want to thank you for alerting us that we were gonna be here, because I'm not sure I would have gone and checked the Desi website, because, yeah,
That's been a little crazy.
I appreciate you doing that.
Except you know what, Karen? We could have met with K through 5, is there a problem?
There you go. There you go. No, but I appreciate you doing that, because,
Thank you.
and then I double checked again early this morning just to make sure that we were going the same place.
Once again, this is before the meeting starts, and so it's not business, but if anyone wants to read some papers I brought for you, I have them.
What papers did you bring?
I know that we were asked to look at the Massachusetts standards because of the Fordham Institute rating.
Right.
The Fordham Institute rating rates them a B plus and rates them 4.9. And this is, and it's not that much to look at. It's that, they tell you kind of the strengths and weaknesses. So if we're looking towards the Fordham Institute, then we can try to kind of look at the weaknesses of, specifically of the Massachusetts.
Well, because every document has strengths and weaknesses.
And it says both do, I'm not.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then the other one I have is a letter from the National Governors Association for Minutes, rights to do whole or selective excerpts of portions.
Cool. Great.
So they're there.
I'm gonna take a copy, thank you, Nancy. Oh, you made it. How was the, John's?
It was pretty nasty at one point there, that's what I hear. That's what I hear.
What should you have to read?
Your daughter is an accounting major, she's had the Wayne Clark experience. My daughter is an accounting major, but she's changing her mind right now, so.
Well, she did last night when we were
Is she a freshman too?
announcing the tornado.
What dorm is she in?
Yeah,
My daughter was in, Maria's in class, which wasn't, it was a guy's dorm last
Well,
year.
actually, it was built to be
Because I don't like,
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It wasn't even
I
a
don't like
closet,
giving out
so-
my telephone number.
No, it's got like an arm wall.
That's what we did.
But they've got their own bathroom.
Yeah, it's
That's
nice.
the attraction of it.
I don't know, I didn't know.
Yes, lodge.
I didn't know.
Yes, lodge.
I don't know, maybe. We have no idea.
Yeah, well,
Well, you
She's
cannot.
here unless there's a
And maybe-
And maybe, I don't know, but maybe if it's, there's something that they have to change, it has to be done. But the email seemed to be a better way.
Well,
So,
Maria started, she
I don't
was
think, I don't think it's even that.
because she was doing that every time, so she's like,
Oh, yeah.
because
That one, yeah.
computers are really
Well, I'll
not.
probably have her next semester, so they can all,
I mean, nobody starts there.
not next, maybe not next semester, maybe fall. Each year. My
And
daughter.
Ann, are you looking for the restrooms? Yeah, wait, you know where they are.
That's
They're, yeah, they're kind of back and forth.
There's some back there too.
Well, they're both sides.
Okay.
Yes, I
bet.
bet.
Okay, you're not.
The math are
Hey,
No.
was this
I
love?
kinda wanted to-
So there's some over there by the elevators?
Yeah, they're on both sides. If you walk back towards the
And
office.
she didn't know there were elevators.
Yeah, there's two different sets now.
She graduated.
So as soon as everybody gets back in, should we go ahead and get started?
Yes, we should.
Okay, so we have
Well,
a
she's
couple
our
people.
first, so.
So I think a couple of people are back using
Little
using the
stressful.
facilities in it, and then we'll go ahead and get
We're
started.
just
So.
trying to encourage her.
Yeah.
She's, how old is she? She's 18. She's a freshman at SBU, where he is. Yeah.
You got a connection then.
Well, I'll tell her.
Does anybody know if David's been
There is
here?
some
I
great
don't know.
teachers there.
David, the guy that was from, I think he's from
Talked like
Seattle.
when we left last week, he would be, but that's.
I don't know, maybe he got caught in some rain. I don't know what 50 highways.
It was awful.
Huh?
50 was awful.
Yeah, it's.
50, I came in 50, but I came 50 highway from Kansas City. What time did you leave?
I left home at about 6:40.
Okay, I left home at 5:40.
Yeah, a lot of it was 40 miles an hour because you couldn't hardly see and there was
Yeah.
just great big piles of water going over the road.
Yeah, there were some places that were kind of dangerous. I thought on the road. So,
Yeah, I was hydroplaning.
yeah.
That last little, from the lake to here.
And unfortunately, the semis were not swimming. This
So you say you was in the Kansas?
I thought she was. She didn't say whether she was or wasn't, but I was assuming that she was.
I thought
Yes,
she
you
definitely was tomorrow.
Professional.
I thought she was today as well.
Deborah, I stuff my
Well,
email.
it is.
Deborah saying she will not be able to travel to different cities.
Yeah, I'm Deborah Miller from Parkdale.
Wonderful.
But I don't know about David. We know Lisa's not gonna be here. And Julie, I'm not really, I'm assuming she's gonna
Julie
be.
said yesterday she'd be here.
Yeah, that's what I thought. She may be in the traffic though, that Maggie, what you were talking about, because there's some issues on both 70 probably and 50 highway, so hopefully she'll be here soon. Since we have a quorum, because didn't we sit the last time, I believe, and I'm not trying to leave this, and I'm telling you, I'm sitting in the corner because I have a cold, so I'm not gonna shake people's hands. Yeah, exactly. I don't wanna give anybody
I'm
else.
sitting in the corner because I forgot to take one.
And and also because that's where I spent most of my elementary school years, was in the corner. So anyhow, and I'm not trying to run anything, so we don't really have an official facilitator.
So would we entertain a motion that since you did a great job keeping us on time and we were able to get things on, between the two of you, that you would take that responsibility or that role?
I'll second that, Puppy, if it's a motion.
Thank you, I will move it.
Discussion. All in favor of Kathy, being the chair of the meeting, or raise your hand.
Facilitator.
Moderator. Facilitator.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
Okay.
8.
I'll
Let's see. How many-
Against,
how many-
just to make sure I didn't see.
kind of went against myself.
No.
And abstentions. Get it, baby.
Do we
Okay.
have 10 people here? Is that what we have?
I think we have
nine.
10.
So we have to have 7 to pass the bill, right?
No. Oh,
Well,
yes.
I think based upon that, we'd have to have that because we said 2/3
Yes.
of whoever quorum that has to be here. Okay. So what we talked about at the last meeting is that we were first gonna do, we have some new folks here, so if we can round table around, and maybe just introduce ourselves so that everybody here knows who everybody is and where we're from, so, we'll start in the opposite corner, if Nancy, go ahead.
I'm Nancy Bergfeld. I was a classroom teacher for 37 years. I was appointed by Missouri School Board Association because this is my third term on the school board for Northwest R1, which is just southwest of St. Louis.
I'm Maggie Schmitz, I'm from Warsaw, I've been a teacher for just a little bit over 30 years, and I've also got a 17-year-old child.
I'm Jen Layden. I'm from North Kansas City in the Lake Group School District.
Graduate. And I'm Kathy Battles. I taught high school math for 31 years in the Lee Summit School District. And I currently, right now, am curriculum consultant and work at a regional professional development center. And I was appointed by the governor, don't know him, but so I was appointed.
Here we go. I'm Tiffany Jones. I am a teacher in Nixon. I teach 7th and 8th grade math, and this is my 11th year teaching. I also have 3 kids in elementary schools. And I was appointed by Joseph.
I'm Margaret Bongeter from St. Joseph and was appointed by Teacher Associations, Missouri State Teachers Association. And I'm trying to be semi-retired sometimes.
You failed.
I know, I failed twice. So I'm still doing some math consulting and then also teaching a graduate class for Northwest Missouri State University.
I'm Nancy Birch, I teach at the technical school in Chillicothe, Missouri. I've been teaching for like 21 years. I have one in college and one in middle school and one in elementary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Bob Glasgow, I teach professor of math at Southwest Baptist University. I've taught junior high and high school math the last 26 years. I've taught at SBU, and I was appointed by the teacher prep programs. I teach in the math department. I work with people who are going to be elementary, middle school, high school math teachers, and so do a lot with teacher preparation.
I'm Ann Gassel, and I have 2 children who went to the Rockford School District. My son is still in there. Hopefully he will be leaving. So I'm a little embarrassed.
I'm Laura Martin, and I am a parent. I have 4 children. My oldest is 18 and is SBU, and I have a 15-year-old who's a freshman and a 7th grader. He has Down syndrome, and I have 4. So, and I have a 5th grader who we adopted from China. So I like to think my little family is kind of a microcosm of the diversity that is Missouri and the nation. So I'm also a school board member in our 3 school districts, and I, in something of a former life, was a school psychologist. So that's me. And I apologize for not being here last time. My husband and I had a trip planned for 6 months,
And you need to take that.
we did.
And I think a lot of people found out really late.
Yeah.
You know, I just appreciate everybody making the effort to be here. So, and Julie got here late because I'm sure she gets stuck in some rain or traffic. You look.
Both. Actually, both. There was a terrible accident, I guess, in Columbia, and I should have been here 45 minutes before I was, but we spent a lot of time
Yeah.
literally
understand.
stopped on I-70 that side of Columbia.
So if you just introduce
And it
yourself.
was a terrible wreck too.
That's too
So,
bad.
but I'm Julie Schuster, and I am here as an education professional appointed by the president first time of the Senate. I am a math teacher currently in high school. My 8th year teaching high school. Had way more than 3 years of college teaching math before that, and also some other careers and things. And I also am a parent of 4 children, 2 of which have graduated from Missouri Public High Schools, and 2 of which are currently in middle school. So,
Are you having that joy of middle school?
I love it. I love it. Yeah.
Good, good. Well, I guess thanks for everybody being here today and making the effort, because this was not an easy way to get in today with all the rain and everything. One of the things we talked about is at the beginning of the meeting, I think that, and these are the kind of the notes that we took about setting an agenda. At our last meeting, we set the agenda for this meeting. And for those of you that are new, Nancy has set up a Dropbox folder where the notes are going to be always dropped in there, so everybody always has access to those when that time is done. And what I propose maybe too is that we type up this agenda, like if we have an agenda, the next time we type it up and put it in there as well, so everybody will have access to it before they walk in the door, so that we kind of know what's going on. I think what we were gonna talk about, we said that we were gonna try to keep it, if I remember right, try to keep it to about 15 to 20 minutes about questions and answers of what went on in the last meeting. So, I guess I'll just kind of open it up for that, and see what questions people might have, especially those of you that were not here, and I know Julie, you had to leave early because you had kiddos that you had to get. So, shall we open that up and see what questions we might have about that?
Oh, just
Yeah,
say-
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, yeah, sorry.
For those of you who weren't here, we had to resort to this last time.
Nice. What, yeah, and as long as everybody can allow people to finish their statements and they get in, I think that's fine.
Well, actually, I just sort of had more of a procedural question.
Sure.
Because I know we have the Dropbox, which is great for us, but we do
Right.
have certain sunshine requirements for these meetings because we're considered a government body.
Right.
So we need to have formal minutes from these meetings that can get put on Desi's site or,
And I don't know, that's a really good question. So how, does anybody here know how that's getting out? Because you're right, that
Well,
doesn't.
the transcripts are, that's what Jane's doing, right? And they've been put on there so far, so,
well,
and the video, the whole
the
thing.
transcript is not minutes of a meeting. I mean, there are certain formal requirements. So can I make a motion that we have somebody who will keep formal minutes and that at the end of the meeting, we review them? The minutes of the things that, what are the action items, what motions were made, who seconded it, what was the vote count, so that there's a formal record of what was
That's not
decided.
Are you saying kind of like not a transcript? but
Right,
just
not a
more-
transcript.
Cause that's a lot to read.
It is, and, you know, this is, there's this formal public record of what actions were decided at the meeting. And something we can all review very quickly at the end, you can compare it to your notes to make sure that they're accurate, and then we can say, okay, this is, vote on, and say these are the official minutes.
So had you, and had you seen the minutes that Jake kept last time? Because he did have motions and seconds and the counts,
I
and
just
so
would like to
is there
see
something
that.
in between or something extra that needs?
Talk about Wes.
Last,
Right.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
oh,
that's
okay,
right, I'm keeping
oh, okay.
Just a record of motions and those things like, okay, if I'm not mistaken, I don't wanna take away from what you're saying, but just those decisions that were basically made here so people can go back and review, and then if they wanna read the whole transcript, they can.
Right, and that, you know, and that becomes a transcript, but not,
Right,
because that's too much for us to all go over and say, yeah, that's accurate, that's right, so.
yeah. I'm fine with that, I second that motion. Did you make an official motion?
I made a motion that we assign somebody to be the official recorder of the minutes, and that we read them back at the end of the meeting for everyone's approval.
I'd second the motion. Any discussion? All in favor? Okay, all opposed? So, any that abstain? Woo, starting off a great way, okay. Now, I guess the next issue would be, who is that person going to be? Do we have any volunteers?
Well, I volunteered to do it because for 15 years, that was my job, and I was trained by a law firm instead.
Oh, so you know how to do it?
So I know generally what will pass legal muster for these things, so I volunteered. That's okay.
Fine with me, yeah. Fine
So
with me.
then, would you also make record of those and we can put them in the Dropbox
Yes,
also?
oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very unusual that somebody volunteers to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. So, great, Ann, I'm glad you brought that up. Any questions though about the last meeting? Because I know Julie had to leave early, not everybody was here. Anybody have any questions about what transpired at the last meeting before we move on? Okay, I'll just, and tell me if I'm wrong, what we did the last time is we looked at the document that was written from higher ed, the entry competencies or the exit competencies from high school. We talked about some of those issues, some things we liked, some things we didn't like, we talked about those things. And then we looked at the sixth grade Common Core document, and then we, what our agreement was, we just looked at what we liked and what we didn't like, because we had some wording and things that were some issues that we all agreed with. And then we were gonna go back and look at Massachusetts, fifth and sixth grade today. And I think that was gonna be our starting ground, and then we were gonna look at Massachusetts, seventh and eighth grade, and Common Core, 5 and 7th grade, to see what we like and what we don't like, to help develop what we think is best for our kids in the state of Missouri. So that's where I'll leave it. Where do we want to start?
I would like to make sure we're all looking at the same message.
The same message.
So,
because there are
so that I'm on
two.
the same page as everybody, so
I
which one
agree.
are we,
Because it was-
referring to right now?
So,
2000 is the one we just talked about.
yeah, the grade, the one that's the grade span, that's grade 5, 6, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
it's Spain's, yeah.
I don't know if this will be helpful or not, but this is, I think we're using Fordham Institute as a frame of reference. And this is part of a document that actually talks about the Massachusetts 2000 frameworks. And so it gives some of the strengths and weaknesses so that you might be able to look at it and use it, because it was written by people that we said that we were gonna rely on their words.
So good news. Any objections? Pat, do you have enough copies? I think you do.
I
Pat, you have enough copies for everybody?
And if anyone needs my post-its, I have them for everyone.
Oh, and I brought 2 highlighters. Does anybody, if anybody needs a highlighter, I brought 2 highlighters. And I've got some markers if anybody needs those, so.
Look, I was at Staples this morning, they were on sale. You know, teachers and markers.
There you go.
I did look at the 2000 document, but I also looked at the other 2 documents that Nancy had put in Dropbox, just to see similarities and differences. You know, National Council of Teachers of Mathematics also launched their NCT and Principles and Standards in 2000. It's 2014. So a lot has happened in just the last 10 years. I wonder if we could also look at the more recent documents. I mean, the 2000 feeds into.
Right.
Are you saying look at Massachusetts 2014?
Yeah, it wasn't at 11 and 14.
Well, they have a supplement that's 4.
2004 that adds to the 2000, and then they have a more recent one,
Yes.
which is
More
two.
recent is Common Core. Okay, so we already look at Common Core.
Okay, so what about when we look at the Common Core document, look at what, maybe look at Massachusetts in conjunction and see if they've changed it? 'Cause
And
we're-
Massachusetts is on Common Core.
No, they
Well,
And
I haven't
standards
reviewed it, so I don't know.
they have their own standards designated, like with an MA in front of them. So if they wanted to, I don't know how to say, I mean, if they wanted to supplement, like one of them that I looked at was talking about addition in 2nd grade. Well, they also wanted to include subtraction. So they tweaked, you know, and they've rearranged some of them. It's not verbatim. It's not standard by standard.
So would we want to do that when we're looking at, put those 2 together, the Common Core document along with the Massachusetts document, to see likenesses and differences when we look at grades 6, 7, and 8? Does that make sense to do that?
I haven't read this to Nancy Taylor, but looking at the bottom line here, what Fordham says on bottom of page 169. I kind of feel the same way. I mean, I think Common Core and this one cover essentially the same things. I think for high school, the organization of the Massachusetts might be better.
Yeah.
But I think for middle school, it's going to be problematic for us because they've got this 5, 6, And I don't think it's as organized as well as the middle school Common Core. It's not that different, it's not tremendously different, but the organization of it especially, I think is problematic.
Well, I think really we're looking at the actual content, and then it's up to us, you know, just split it into grade levels or whatever, or to say, oh, this concept is important, and this concept isn't. It's not necessarily that we're taking the document and saying that we're gonna use this, but, you know, this concept is important for seventh graders to learn, so we need to put it there.
Yeah, that's to me is one of our biggest difficulties here. I mean, we can say, oh, we'll take this and we'll split it apart. That's a massive task.
It is.
I mean, it really is. And I know that we are to develop our own standards, but when you read the history even of this one, Massachusetts, and see how long it took them, how many people they had working on this. This is a massive task, and I don't know if any of us really realize just how big it is. I started to realize this week, and I was very impressed. And so, you know, I don't think we're going against our bill to take something and fix it to what we want it to be without having to break it into tiny pieces. And because the more we do that, the less coherent our standards are going to be. And that's the advantage of having something that a group has worked on all together, is that there is coherence now. The tweaking or the switching a few things, I don't think is a big deal, but I'm really scared of tearing everything into pieces and starting over again, because I don't think we'll make it.
I'd like to see us reword things for clarity.
Yes.
That's what I've heard that's what I heard Lisa say last week, that she felt that some of the standards lack clarity. And so I think rewording things, making sure that they are organized well.
Well, and I think what you said about the high school standards, they were not written as coherently as what the other standards were, and I think we would all agree with that, yeah. You know, there's some good things there, you know, there are some good things there, and they've looked at things vertically, but yet there is definitely room for improvement.
The word I kept hearing from high school teachers, I know a number of them in North Missouri and around, and I was talking to them about Common Core, and the word that came up over and over again was cumbersome. They're very cumbersome, and they're not clear as to what we are supposed to do. They would like something that they can read and not have somebody interpret or anything, not have to have a PD person come in and explain them, but to look at it in mathematical terms and say, got it, I can teach this.
And I think, I'm sorry, I'm kind of interrupting, I'm sorry about that, but I think part of it is that they wrote it as high school, then they tried to split it apart to Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, and then Integrated Math 1, Integrated Math 2, and that's when that really cumbersome really got to me. Yeah, exactly. And so I think we can really take that and do a good job.
So Bob, I heard you say that you've looked at the organization of Massachusetts high school. Have you also looked at ACT?
No.
I mean,
Yeah, I haven't looked.
if Missouri is giving the ACT in 11th grade, I guess I kind of call that our yardstick now. And the state makes improvements, a lot of districts make improvements every year. We're definitely not leading the pack, but we're growing. So, and I think it is on the agenda to look at ACT.
Yeah, it is.
So I think however Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 are organized, I guess it's kind of like the driver's test, you know, we all studied for it, and we all took our driver's test, and we have a license. And then some individuals wanted to drive bigger rigs, so they studied a little more, you know, their CDL license, and I guess that's our STEM people. So, I mean, I don't see that we all have to get the same score on the ACT, but I think we need to work towards it.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, but on that, and, you know, and as somebody who's, you know, currently as a high school person, and, you know, and I listen and hear things, it's not only that it's cumbersome and hard to follow and that you have to have people interpret, it's that people interpret it in different ways. I talk to so many people that tell me we're doing it this way, and then, you know, a week later, a different district, somebody else, or a different PD person will say, you know, we're doing that, and it's the dead opposite. You cannot reconcile those things. and I feel like that's a problem. And I just wanna caution, I'm not disagreeing with Margaret's point about the ACT. I get that people, all juniors are gonna take that beginning this year, if that's the path we're on, and what they're telling us. That's gonna have some impact on districts that don't require all kids to take Algebra 2 and maybe a whole lot of things. But I just wanna come back and say, I don't want that to be our guidepost, because I fear it. I think that, it's a private product. I know that I'm not the only parent who's dead set on refusing to let their kid take it. I feel like that's, the way of the future is to go against those tests. So I know that we're serving our whole population, and I look at my kids and I think, I think the right amount of times for them to take tests like that is never, but that's not how they are to do it. And so I'm a public servant, and I did that, and I want everybody to know that. But that doesn't mean that, I want there to be a caution with that. I want us to recognize that that's a private product, and we are representing public education.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
So are we going to be doing 5th and 6th right now?
Shall we look at 5th and 6th, and then maybe we'll try it, and to look and see where we're going, and then go from there. I agree.
I have
I agree with what you said.
a couple comments on the Massachusetts 5th and 6th, and maybe I was not in a coherent mood, I don't know. But one of the things, I'm looking at page 34, where it's talking about Adams relations and algebra.
Which document are you in?
2000,
Aren't we talking about Massachusetts 2000 frameworks?
Yeah, I was just making sure because I'd opened 11 earlier, so,
Yeah.
sorry.
Got too many more.
Because we were zooming all around, we're taking a tour. I am a little concerned that, first of all, I don't like grade band stuff, I don't like sick stuff. To know who's doing what and who has the onus for making sure those kids are ready, I'm not appreciative of that. And when it's talking about the learning standards on page 34, I also think that we should start in 6th grade having our kids use variables,
Oh, amen, please.
rather than smiley faces and open circles and boxes and things like that. So that was one of the things that I didn't particularly like here. And I didn't think all of these were very clear, to be honest with you. I think there's some things we can take from them, but that was on page 34, was one of my concerns.
So it was the patterns and relationships.
Well, that's one of them.
Yeah, that's one.
Okay.
So you're specifically saying use X and Y and not.
Use variables.
Variables.
Yeah, the way in which I put it was self-simple equations of AX plus B equals C, and, because that was something I saw was lacking also.
I personally think, I appreciate that you say that, I think that when we start kiddos out in middle school, and I'm kind of separating the 5th from the 6th, that we start them with 1-step equations.
Right, yeah.
And then in 7th, we'll go on to 2-step equations or multi-operational equations. So if I'm just concentrating on the 5th and 6th, I would at least appreciate them just doing variables in there instead of symbols.
Yeah, and in that regard, this is sort of maybe it's a little point, but I would like to see the use, I agree with Nancy, the use of variable is a great concept, but when you have the word variable and you're using, that suggests that there's, variability in the values of whatever it is. And if you have, x plus 1 equals 2, just to be simple, then, that x isn't really a variable. And I know I thought of this, some long time ago, but the word, having kids think about, what's an unknown, what's a variable, and holding off on that. So I've seen that in some other standards. I don't see that, here, at least the way they do it in Massachusetts, it's not incorrect, but I would like to, put that out there as part of the vocabulary.
And if I'm not mistaken, because I think that was one thing that was surprising when I read the Common Core document, I don't think they use the word variable, I think they use letters. They use a letter to represent. And so maybe, and a letter to represent on unknown. So language is really important, because we confuse a lot of kids with language, and I know this is not really dealing with sixth grade, but in some respects, the push not to use the word reduce when you're using fractions, because is 1/2 smaller than 2/4, reducing it, so it kind of sets up a lot of confusion. So I appreciate you bringing up the language, because I think we really do want to be
And
careful
I
about
think that's important, and I think that's, when I look at these, I mean, I read the whole introduction to these. I mean, it's where we were in 2000. I mean, it's the principles and standards it's NCTM's principles and standards for school mathematics. It's the language of 2000, which in 2000 it was good language, but we say things differently now, and teachers, you know, I mean, if you look at the teacher population right now, most of them were in elementary school in 2000. So, it's something I realize every day in college is my students don't know what a record is, or you know, they don't know things that I know because they're just too young. And so, I mean, if we use this kind of language when our teachers have been trained and are being, you know, they're using the language of Common Core right now and have been for a couple of years, it's gonna be the same thing again, like, oh, this is a whole new language. Well, no, it was around 15 years ago, but we decided to use it again. So I think that's something that's that's one of my big problems with this, is just that the words that are used, and even things like you're talking about with unknown and variable, and, you know, it's different.
Common Core just uses variables, they don't use unknown.
I was thinking that
They use what, in
Some places-
sixth
it's like-
grade, expressions in which letters stand for numbers. So that's under
And I think,
expressions.
and I think that's, I think one of the things we really need to do is like, these are problem words, and maybe we can keep track of what are problem words that we wanna try to make sure, if we use them, that we have a definition of them, so that we don't have a confusion that we've had in the past. So if we come across any words that we can't think of a better word to use, then let's come up and find a definition that we can use as a glossary, so all people will know what that means. Because language, let's face it, is spiritual.
Yeah, it is, and it's not a question of, you know, what mathematicians use, you know, it's what people that are not mathematicians use. I mean, I think we need to be focused on words that have ordinary meanings and using those words as they are ordinarily used. That's what
Yes, because I would like to see an end to the use of the number sentence. I'm sorry, it's not a sentence, an equation. By definition, both sides are going to balance their equal.
Well, and I think that the number sentences is used in the Common Core, it was used in Missouri standards, but it's not used in the Common Core.
That was sort of a Missouri thing.
That was, and they start using the word equation, I think in kindergarten, the number sentence is not there anymore.
Yeah,
Because
it was
that was
always,
confusing.
it was always confusing because a lot of textbooks that districts use in the state never said numbers. I mean, they always said equations.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I would like to. I would like to.
So we begin a list of words.
I have Kathy's right here.
Oh, you do? Okay. She's the word list.
I just have a question for clarification, probably more than anything. Because it almost sounded like you were saying, that we're not calling things the right thing right now, and the kids that are coming out of, you know, education colleges or whatever aren't, so we'll just keep doing it that way, because that's what they're used to, or are you saying?
No, that's not what I was saying. I was
Okay.
saying that the language we use now is different than it was 14 years ago.
Right, but is there right
I
and
didn't
wrong?
say it was right or wrong.
Okay,
It's
well,
different
that's what I guess I'm asking you, will we be agreeing on right and wrong language, so to speak, and re-educating our educators who are in those colleges, so that, because I realize language is fluid, but math, you know, there's some stability, I hope.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of, I'm not saying one's better than the other, because in 2000 this was good. I mean, what I'm saying is, if we try to wholesale take something from 2000, there's going to be as big or more of a learning curve than there was when we started talking Common Core. I mean, it would be completely different. I think that would be a mistake. That's what I'm saying. The wholesale go back 14 years.
And there's some words in both documents that
Yeah,
doesn't
sure.
matter.
And for clarity's sake.
Yeah, clarity.
Right,
I think that's what we need to do, is
Yeah.
whatever we use.
I
Whatever
like
is
the
clarifying.
idea that you're saying we're gonna define
Right,
terms, and we're going to use words purposefully.
exactly.
Not just, well, that's what we've been calling it, I mean, there's a reason behind
Right.
why you're using the word you're using.
Right, and I think that goes back to, once we decide, then we need to go out and research and find out, is this the right thing to do? Because this is a group here, but then I know there are a lot of people, most people in this room are a lot smarter than I am, but I know there's a lot smarter people outside this room. And so to try to get some clarification about the word variable, because I agree with you, Julie, I think variable can be very misconceiving to a lot of kids, so.
Not only that too, but, you know, we're all here, we know the discussion behind,
Yeah.
we know the intent of the
Right.
group, and then if you just give a standard to a teacher who's in the classroom and has not been here, sometimes they don't know the intent. And so that's the reason why it's really important that we
Right.
not only write it here, but then take it to other people and say, does this make sense to you? Do you know what we mean by that?
Tiffany, do you think, as a classroom teacher, that it was helpful to have asterisks and glossary?
Yes, I'd like the
attached?
glossary.
And that could be something that we do to make sure that we're defining clearly what our intent is.
Right. I think that's a really good point.
Okay, and by the way, I wanted to say that I started with having some relationships because when I was looking at numbers, sense, and operations, I think that a lot of that depends on what fifth grade does. It was so heavily based in what I see more as elementary school stuff that I think we need to see how we're gonna bridge that gap before we say what is or good or bad about these standards. So that was me personally.
Yeah, because a lot of that stuff now is fifth grade, and it's all together. In Massachusetts, it's hard to, you can't tell what's fifth and sixth grade.
I'm gonna go back to parents and relations and algebra, if that's okay.
Sure.
I'm still on page 34.
Well, it helps, I think, to stay on the same topic.
Solve linear equations, use concrete models, okay, tables, graphs, paper, pencil methods. Linear equations, I'm not sure exactly what they're looking for there at the sixth grade level. So I think that some of this has to be, like you said, just delineated a little bit more. Yeah, I think that's pretty open. I mean, there's some wild stuff we could be putting in there and asking kids in the sixth grade, and I don't think it's developed yet in the rest of their standards, the way I see it in there. They do talk in 6P7, hey you, identifying strong relationships between two variables and a constant rate. That's to me, jumping the gun. But I see that smile on your face.
I think that's a lot for sixth graders. I would really, I teach 7th and 8th, and the first part of the school year, I have to spend so much time with my 7th graders just doing fractions and decimals and operations with fractions and decimals because they do not have a master. And I would, or multiplication tables, and my 8th graders don't know their multiplication tables, and you know, I would much rather see them see 6th grade spend some more time with that than get into the linear that I don't think that they're quite ready for.
I agree.
Can I just ask, did you just say that there needs to be more definition around linear equations, or is it misleading?
I think when I was up in 6P5, that said solve linear equations. Well, I guess it depends on what you call a linear equation.
So you're saying we need more definition around it?
Yes, not just definition there, because you're right, more definition, plus in 6P7 and it actually talks about two variables, and it's talking about constant rate of change. To me, that is such an important topic, and you can approach it in so many ways, and they have to have such a clear understanding and basis before they can go on to the things that they're gonna grab in Algebra 1, that doesn't belong at that early. I don't think they're developmentally ready at that grade level to tackle that, because we're setting standards for every child. And that, yeah, there's some kids that are gonna pick it up, guaranteed. But I don't think that's appropriate in 5th and 6th grade.
So Tiffany, would you say that fits better in 7th, or are you really almost 8th?
It depends on how in depth you go with it. I think 7th grade has a good start, and I really like the, you know, if we in our standards include a 7th grade accelerated track and an 8th grade accelerated track, that's very beneficial to teachers also, because then that could be in that 7th grade accelerated track, but not necessarily the in-depth portion of it for just 7th grade. But yeah, you can expose them to it in 7th grade, I think, really get into the depth, I think eighth grade is better for all, I mean, when we're talking all students, including students with, you know, IEPs and 504s and everything, I think it's better off to wait, or they don't truly understand it, and then you're reteaching it again in algebra.
And I think that's the mistake we make in education. We continue to reteach and reteach and reteach, instead of taking the time that we really need to develop the concepts into the depth that they need to be developed, so that we're not having to reteach it again, maybe reminding them that not having to take so much time to go back into those fractions is a huge thing, that we need to spend a lot more time on so our kids develop those concepts, you know, really understand them.
In
So-
general,
And retain.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, in general, in Common Core, modeling with linear equations happens really in seventh grade beginning, and is developed more in eighth grade.
Well, and the way I feel it should go is sixth grade should be one-step equations and become so proficient with those that you can just do it.
Become like they could do it automatically.
Seventh grade, I'll call it, multi-step or two-step equations, most of us call them, and become proficient with those before you add that second variable in.
Oh, yeah.
In other words, 3x plus 4 equals 20. Get really good at solving them with numbers in there before you add the second variable in. Because if you have y equals mx plus b, or y equals 3x plus 10, and then you want them to solve it or do something with the x, they're going to have to start moving those numbers again, and they better have been proficient with that in seventh grade. So that's how I see the progression. Is sixth grade is one letter variable.
Right, whatever we
Please forgive
decide
my
on, one
language,
unknown,
okay?
yeah.
One unknown, okay?
One
And,
hundred.
yeah. And then, seventh grade has two operations with it, just still one unknown. And then eighth grade, you can have two variables or two unknowns, but then they've mastered how to manipulate those numbers in a linear equation.
And I was just gonna say, I was in a school yesterday, working with middle school math teachers and working with seventh grade teachers specifically, and they were talking about their kids struggling with the two-step, because two-step equations for the high school teachers would go, well, why are they struggling with it so much? But so many things were added in because they were doing positive and negative numbers, they were doing fractions, and when you add all that into that, that's a lot. So sometimes we, as high school teachers, why are they having so much trouble with two-step equations? Well, they're just learning, really reinforcing the fractions, so there's a lot that's done with that. So it's interesting that we're talking about today, because I was just working with teachers on that yesterday, so.
So we really have to get it down pat
Yeah, it is.
before you move those little kiddos on, because you're starting to go from a concrete to this abstract idea. And I'm guessing most of us were pretty adept at that in school, thinking abstractly, but many of our learners are not.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, I have daughters that are 6th and 8th graders right now, and it's my 8th graders in Algebra 1. And she doesn't ask me for a lot of help with math, but and my husband always says, you know, what am I, whatever I can do. You know, but no, she wants to wait for mom, and that's okay. You know, and sometimes when I try to not trivialize what she's doing, but so often, you know, she's like, wow, you know, this is really that easy. And I think, yes, you know, this is what you're going for is, but then I imagine my 6th grader trying to do, you know, almost the same things, and I just think, you know, wow, that is so much that's going on. And she's a perfectly capable child, but, you know, why we need to let them be ready. You know, I didn't have Calc 1 until I was in college. Now, I realize it's not done that way today, fine, but I did not think it was hard. I wonder back on my 17-year-old self, would I have found it hard then? You know, so I do think we need to consider how young some of these kids are and really try to look at that in a reasonable way.
And I agree a lot with that, and I think that's one of the things that I'm having problems with some of this, especially this part, is that I think it's doing a lot of good things, but I want to see some really in-depth. I mean, these statements are very short and they need much amplification. And there are some things to me that I think the language, this is the language thing again. One of the words I'm looking for here, and somewhere in middle school is function.
Yeah.
Because to me, instead of just saying linear equations, we need to be talking about linear functions. Now, maybe not in 6th grade, but I just looked ahead to 8th grade. And really doesn't do it much in 8th grade either. It's really 10th grade when they start talking about functions. To me, function is the key. I'm sorry, I just have to look ahead, but I mean, function is the key concept here in terms of modeling. And whether it's linear, whatever kind of function, and that idea of a function, and they just throw equation out there, and I think it's important. And this thing about making sure they understand, I think is the real key thing to having fewer standards at grade level, so that they can go in depth and talk about in a linear function. What does the y-intercept tell us? Not just on a graph, but what does it tell us in the context of modeling? What does the slope, the rate of change tell us in the context of modeling? That's the way we at SBU have changed our college algebra course, so that it is more of a modeling course, so we can take data and help students see how they can use functions to model with data. And to do that, you have to talk about what those things mean, not just y-intercept point there and go up 1 and over 2 or whatever, but you have to talk about what that means in the context of a problem. I'm not seeing much of that here.
Yes. Sorry. And I applaud you for that, too, and, you know, that modeling, and I completely agree with that functions, that's that #1 concept. I wonder too, though, if we should make a distinction between functions as an idea and function notation. Young kids find that function notation super confusing, and so I just wanted to add that to that, and then I wanted to apply that for children.
I put on the list equation versus function and function versus function notation.
Great.
Because I agree with you,
Yeah,
that's
totally.
the next progression.
And yeah, because high school, that's even an issue with function notation, that's still a huge issue at high school.
But it's too late at 10th grade.
It is,
Start
start
talking
introducing
about, stop talking in depth. They kind of mentioned it in 8th grade, but I think it's too late at 10th grade. It needs to happen way before that.
Would you bring inequalities along with equations or separate?
I think that inequalities belong there too, because the kids can deal with that. And I think that that's an excellent reason why we must separate exactly what we're doing. Deal with one, whether variable, unknown, whatever the heck we're talking about there. And it can be equations. And then in that same grade, step them up with the inequalities.
And representing them on a number line that
Absolutely.
concrete
then-
conceptual.
Then the next one is two-step or multi-step, whatever we want to call that. But just with one unknown. And then the next one is the idea of leading into a function and having,
Because unless I missed it, I didn't see that, like,
inequalities.
and so, I mean, they were also lacking a little bit in our old GLEs.
Definitely.
They were.
Yeah.
Everything just kind of doing that once. I would like to make sure that we pay attention also to whether or not we're using all rational numbers, like at what age level do they need to be able to do to solve those one-step equations by using the multiplicative inverse? Or, you know, is that going to be a 6th grade? Is that going to be a 7th grade because they struggle with multiplicative inverse?
And is it the language or is it the
Right.
concept?
Right, because if we just say flip it, they know what I mean. If I, you know, and we have to teach vocabulary, and you know, math has its own vocabulary, and we have to teach that. I understand that too. But what we see in our district, and it may just be the way that our district is implementing. So if you guys see it differently, please let me know. Is a lot of times, even when they do some of those higher concepts in the younger grades, it's just with whole numbers. It doesn't include the decimals, it doesn't include the fractions. They have a decimal unit, they have a fraction unit, but then everything else is whole numbers. And so then by the time we get to 7th grade, not only are we putting decimals and fractions in everything for them to reinforce it, then we have to introduce negative numbers because they haven't seen that yet either. And we're introducing the unknowns because they haven't seen that yet either.
And sometimes when they just do integers, or just do whole numbers, they develop some misconceptions and generalizations that are not true. Like when you multiply by 2 numbers, you always get a larger number. Well, that's true until you get to fractions, decimals, and percent. So yeah, and so part of that is really good to think about where have they really developed understand those concepts so that we can really take them and apply them too.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with Tiffany, and I think it's so important to, take things in an orderly way, but you do have to be super careful about the patterns that you're setting up, that they will draw the wrong conclusions. One of my kids last year, the teacher was teaching them the method of approximating square roots without using the square root button on a calculator. I will spare you the story, but if anybody's curious about it, I'd be happy to tell it. But it came to my attention when my 7th grade, early in the year daughter came to me and said, "Mom, I don't get this. You mean the 3rd digit in every square root is a 5? And I thought to myself, well, no. And then I started wondering, but I wonder if it's 10% of the time, and then I'm having this ridiculous conversation with myself. But no. And so my point is, kids notice patterns, and you have to be really careful that you're not setting them up.
And I think that goes back into, because I think you brought up, and we need to have good professional development for our teachers. I think we talked about that last time, because I work with elementary school teachers a lot too. And when I show them the misconceptions and generalizations that kids have, and where that leads to, they feel bad. And I said, well, don't feel bad about it. Just make sure that you don't tell kids this is always true, because they tell their kids you always subtract the smaller number from the larger number. You always do that. Well, no, you don't. And so we have to do a good job of professional development.
Yes, and let me just flash the warning light again here about, we have to be careful. I agree with everything that's been said, but we have to remember we're not writing a curriculum.
That's right.
And we can't delineate every single thing.
No, we
That's,
can't.
and even if you did, people still would do a different thing with it. So, I mean, part of it is professional development, part of it is curriculum writing in schools. That's where the local control really happens.
Absolutely.
But, I think our standards need to be very clear,
Absolutely.
but I don't think we can delineate every single kind of example we would use or not use. We got to be really careful of that.
I totally agree, but I think that's something that we can maybe keep in our writing notes, that we just need a reminder to remind districts, to remind people to be careful about things of that nature, or when professional development is done, because no teacher wants to do a bad job. Everybody wants to do a good job. I mean, I don't think I've known anybody that's gotten into the profession that wants to mess it
I have one little side story.
up.
I was tutoring a young man that's, we had a grandparent appear before our board and say, I can't find any tutors in math, and you guys need to supply some, or what's the list? And so I wrote him a note and said, I'll tutor your grandson. So we were tutoring, and we're at the public library, and one of the things we were covering was positive negative. And he knew exactly what he was doing. He was a master manipulator, I loved him. But he said,
He worked well with you.
we said something about adding a positive and a negative. I said, John, how do we do that? And he said, well, you just find the difference and give the sign of the bigger one. I said, John, and he knew that I was going to say the one that's farthest from zero, the one with the greatest absolute value, whatever. He said, you already know what I mean. And everybody says that. Everybody knows that. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. I said, you think everybody knows that? And he said, yeah. And I said, do you want me to ask this lady coming in right now? He said, yeah. So I said, excuse me, ma'am. I said, John and I were having a discussion about adding a positive and a negative, and he says that you always give it the sign of the bigger one. And she went, oh my goodness, no. You give it the sign of the one that's farther from zero. Yes. And she said, I'm an accountant, however. Poor John, he was so funny. Anyway, those are my comments on Peving's relations in algebra.
Any other comments on the parents' relation? Because those were all good, and I think we had some good discussion on that.
Okay, and then I went to, let's see, I was looking at page 42, I think, is geometry. Oh, and one of the things I did like about this document, I don't like that it's breakdowns, I'm telling you that.
Yeah.
But I'm 42, I'm sorry about that. I do like that they did show some examples on the side of the pages. I did like that.
The teachers I've talked to have really appreciated the examples.
Yeah, it gives you an idea
And I
of
know
what's going on.
when the GLEs first came out, that was what they was really lacking, was the examples and the examples that were given, so I agree. Did you have something else were you gonna talk about geometry, or did you have something, Julie?
Well, I was gonna go ahead and comment on that grade stamp issue, and I wasn't trying to like not follow instructions, but I did pull out that 2004 just supplement just to see what they had done, and I confined myself only to grades 5 through 8, and really all they did was fix it in response to the No Child Left Behind test everybody every single year mandate. So they just rewrote some 5th grade and 7th grade standards, and I actually really compared the grade 5 ones to the grade 6 ones, and in some cases they simply left out the last 3 or 4. You know, and in other cases, like in geometry, one example, in the grade 5 standard for 6G, the 6G1, but the grade 5 version, they did more specific and limited, so they limited, I didn't write exactly what the limitations were in my notes, but for example, they don't cover all of the, you know, rhombuses, parallel hairs. I think they might have limited it to triangles and maybe something else, but you know, so that is out there. I mean, I agree that the grade span is a little bit unwieldy in that sense, but they did sort of fix those. But then the second thing I wanted to say about that particular issue is I do think while we work on middle schools, I think it would be nice if we end up with something that schools can look at and come up with a fairly clear plan of how to handle those kids that are gonna take Algebra 1 as 8th graders.
I think that's what Tiffany was saying, have an accelerated 7th grade track, because she was saying it, because that is very helpful.
It makes a big difference because otherwise you have your 7th grade teachers that, and in some districts, what they'll do is try to cram in all of the 7th grade standards and all of the 8th grade standards in 1 year so that they're ready for Algebra 1 and 8th grade. And that does not work.
That's crazy.
And, but then in some districts, they say, well, I'm only being tested, my kids are only being tested on the 7th grade math, so I'm gonna cover the 7th grade ones really well, and if I don't get to the 8th grade ones, I don't. And so then, in those districts, your 8th graders you're supplementing 8th grade standards all the time while you're trying to teach Algebra 1. So I really appreciate the appendix in this one that says, okay, if you are going on the accelerated track, then in 7th grade, you're going to do these standards, which in this case covers all of 7th grade and about half of the 8th grade. And then in Algebra 1, you cover all of Algebra 1 and about half. And that way I know which half, and if I have a kid move in from another district, I know which half they've come with. And it isn't just a teacher picking and choosing.
Right.
And I know that we have to leave some of the local control to the district, but with move-ins, we also have to have some continuity, or else I've got this kid who, bless his heart, is a really good worker and was making an A where he came from, but it just doesn't cut it where we're at. And then, you know, he feels like he's not being able to do math when he can.
I agree, so I agree with both, I think we both are on the same track.
Yeah, I
think we all are.
definitely need to have
I
something.
think we all are.
And that's okay, covered in the appendix, as opposed to as a second tier of the standards.
Well, and I think we're talking about middle school, but I mean, we're gonna address some issues when it comes to high school, doing the same thing about kids that are going in college and career, that are gonna go college and career, and those that are gonna go into the science and engineering programs. So I think we're gonna have to come up with a pathway to help people, help guide them. I mean, it's still their local control about what they're gonna do, but this is a suggestion to do that. I think we're gonna have to do that,
I think
something at
that's
the high school level as well.
I think that's a good place to do it. And I mean, that's what they do here, and Common Core does a similar thing with pathways. You know,
Yeah.
I think it's hard, it would be hard to write 2 levels of standards.
Yeah.
I think it would be.
I think, and I think one of the reasons is because most people look at the standards at what we're going to have to do for all students.
Well, I know, but Tiffany had mentioned before having an accelerated set of
Right.
students, I was just asking if she referring to that.
It doesn't matter to me whether it's a separate thing or whether it's in the appendix. I just think it needs to be there because so many districts are allowing their students to take Algebra 1 as an 8th grader and get high school credit for it. But in order to do that, there needs to be a certain path for them to take so that teachers kind of have a common ground.
But what I was gonna say, so if you have this main document that is for all students, and then you have supplement glossary.
For the accelerated.
For the accelerated,
Appendix, whatever, for
engineering
those other
science.
pathways, then I think that clearly separates it for educators so that they know where to look, and what to do. That was my thought.
We have a number of students who take geometry and
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that, that's up to the individual district to accelerate, because I know we had a sixth grader in algebra 2 once, lost him in the hallways, but, it's, yeah, so it's, you're gonna have kids and that's up to the individual school district, but the majority of kids, probably on the average, will be taking algebra 1 in 8th grade or in 9th grade, so we can't, the districts have to, but that's a really good point.
But even so, when you have that accelerated path written, whether it's an appendix or glossary or part of it, then it's easier to take those few
Yeah.
kids in sixth grade and say, okay, well, you're in sixth grade, but you're ready for the seventh grade accelerated and move them up that way. And there's less holes, I feel like, if we do it that way.
Because the one thing we don't want to do is get kids that have, because that's what has been historical in our society, is we change standards and then we have all these huge holes and gaps in kids, and that's what we don't want to have happen. We want to have our kids ready and really look at writing good standards. Julie, you know,
Something really comparing.
Julie, you say something?
Well, in my school, in my district, all kids take algebra 1. We do have some that do geometry in middle school as well, but as a kind of a trade-off for doing that, they pick up 2 summers. They do summer school 2 years to do that. So you have a lot of extra time to get some of those things in for those kids. And then if you're like me, I would choose not to do that because our summers are protected in that way. But I think that that is a good approach, and just to give that clarity so that teachers aren't scrambling to think, and again, I'm absolutely for local control 100%, but so we're just talking about that, guidance, and people don't have to follow it, but I think as a teacher, I would appreciate having a suggested, and then you could have simple conversations about it and say, if you're checking with someone else, well, this is how we do it, and you have a reference document. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think school districts would, school boards, everybody would appreciate adopting that like that, because it just helps guide, okay, kids coming from the district, this is probably what they have had, so it helps, gives you some guidance on that.
Because right now, we have to give them a placement test. When are we gonna do that? We have to give them a placement test to see if they're ready with
And
our algebra 1.
And that's not any different than it's been for years.
I think
That's
this
always
looks like
gone.
it better the way it is now.
Yeah, I think the consistency of that. Before, we never had really state standards as to what algebra 1
Right.
was, and so I think it helps. We've got a long way to go, but
So are you envisioning that you wouldn't need the placement test anymore?
Not as much for movements, because then you have a more level playing field. I mean, yeah, there's still gonna be things that I would need to go back, because maybe our scope and sequence is different than the district that they came from, so I might need to go back and fill in that part for that child, because we already taught it in my district. But at least if we all started off with the same playing field, it makes it a lot better, because what was happening before Appendix A and everything was people were calling their 8th grade class Algebra 1, but it wasn't the Algebra 1 curriculum like we taught, because we taught the high school Algebra 1 curriculum. And so then kids came in, parents came in, and they weren't ready for what we were teaching as Algebra 1, but then people were upset because we had it in the other schools.
And we go back to geometry. This is my,
See, I think Tiffany brings up, since we're doing this for all students, I think she brings up a good point, that they're much more transient now
yes.
than in the past, so considering something that those poor kids that move every 2 months or every month or whatever it is, get something besides the same thing 5 times and these 20 things never, so I think that's a good thing to keep in mind.
And they're transitioned not just within our state, but they're transitioned throughout the United States, the way it was in this, so we have to give that some consideration. Okay, Nancy, you're gonna get back to geometry, good point, straight points.
we seem to just stray to high school as we're discussing Massachusetts different states.
It was
and then we
algebra.
end up in high school.
No, good point, bring us back on target.
The geometry, to me, 6th grade, we can't have a master of everything. And I think they talk about an awful lot here in geometry. They're talking, I get that they're talking about polygons and their properties, identifying shapes. I'm kind of okay with that. Graphing the points, in all 4 quadrants, I'm okay with that, because I believe that they should be doing positive and negative number just identification, not operations, but identifications and locations. And I think that that's plenty for geometry. I think when you start getting down into all those transformations that I had marked as 0.6 through 0.9, I think that's an awful lot to have a kid master. That's my opinion.
That's one of the things I thought too, and you know, one of the, I haven't heard a lot of specific mathematical criticism of Common Core. I've heard lots of criticism, okay, but one of the ones I have heard is the push to use transformational geometry, which we've been doing for a long, long time, but in Common Core, it didn't start till 8th grade. Here it's 6th grade. I mean, that's really early, and I agree. I think it's.
And one of my concerns with this, when I would teach it in my classes, I would teach it with their coordinates so that they would actually write an equation that told what that transformation was. So if they were, and I don't think 6th graders, from what we've talked about with the equations and things, that they're ready to write those equations. So that's why I would hesitate doing it here, because I think when you do it, you gotta do it full and deep and, you know, from every, hit it from every aspect.
That's one of the things, overall things about this one, and I meant to count, I didn't count, but it seems like there's a lot more at every grade level here. It makes me feel like the GOEs again, which is, you know, oh my goodness. We have to do all these things in 1 year, and we don't get to do any of them very deep. We just do a whole lot of things. And so that's kind of the way I felt, especially this is one of the ones I really felt that way. I think there's probably twice as many standards here as there need to be.
And sometimes it's not just number.
Focus, yeah.
You know, if you're gonna focus on the number part, great, or the shape part, great, but don't do that and the transformation. Sorry, Judy.
Yeah, no, and I don't necessarily disagree as to the transformations. It doesn't say how to do it, so that could be addressed as an issue. But when I look at the 6G7 and 6G9, for sure the symmetry, you know, that's. I didn't go below 5th grade, but my kids were doing that when they were 5, I think, or 7 or something. And then nets, they were doing that at a younger age. And again, I mean, I can't speak to what the requirement for that was in terms of Massachusetts, because I didn't go below grade 5. But I mean, those are things that are pretty simple for kids. They like doing those things because they're easy.
And I think that nobody disagrees with that, because I don't disagree with that. I don't think some of those things are that hard, but part of it will be what is the foundation being laid in K through 5.
Okay.
And so that's an element of what we don't know. Plus, I think, if I'm not mistaken, part of the point you were making was so many do fewer and do them really well.
Well, I mean, looking at the Common Core and geometry, there are 4.
I do.
And nets are there, and I think they're there because surface area is one of them. So they're not only do they go deep, but they're connected together pretty well too. So
That's right, they do use
That's what I was gonna say, Julie, I do, and I did need to stop at 8, I said through 9, but it's the transformations and all of the things that were bothering me, not the nets.
But, okay.
I think that connects
Yeah.
to the upper ones where we were talking about the shapes and identifying and things like that. I think those nets connect well with that.
I will say, as far as using nets to find surface area, I worry about how many students are able to think, especially if you have a more difficult figure, abstractly enough to not make the net. They can do that okay, but then put this measurement with this part and this measurement with this part and this measurement with this part, because that seems to be very, very difficult for my 7th graders. Like, just unless I have that paper for them to unfold and do it, then they can do it. But if they have to, if later we're assessing it and they have to draw it themselves and then label it, it's a lot more difficult for them to do.
And I think it's difficult, and I don't know if that's all students or just certain students that really have trouble, or would have been me, having trouble visualizing and drawing that, because I'm not that was a skill that was really hard for me.
but on the other hand, I mean, I can think about the way it was when I was in school. We learned surface area as a formula,
Yes,
and
yeah.
I had, you know,
Memorization
I mean, I've had students for years who learned it with formulas, and they use the formula for a rectangular prism on a triangular prism,
Right.
or on a sphere, you know, I mean, a formula is worthless if you don't know where things come from, and I think that's the idea of using a net, is that you can still develop a formula, but at least you have a way to connect it to what you have. Sometimes the things that we ask students to find surface area on, you know, a rectangular prism, you don't need a formula for that. I mean, you
Oh, I
can figure-
agree. I just am concerned that sixth grade might not be the right age to have them
Oh.
find surface area using the net. I agree that it's a great way to find
Yeah.
surface area and, you know, to teach the kids where it's coming from as opposed to just plug and chug. But,
Julie, what were you gonna say?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, but then so I agree with that looking at a net is a great way to teach, you know, if you're gonna do, you know, a right cylinder or something like that, you know, great. But, and so this is really a question, not a comment, but, what is the purpose of having kids do nets? Is it just to increase their spatial reasoning, or, I mean, does
It
anybody
helps
know
them.
that?
Maybe it is.
It helps them see it.
Yes, so that when they come across any shape, then they're thinking about what does each side of that look like? So that I know that I'm including all of the sides. So if I'm looking at a triangular prism, then I'm thinking, okay, there's 3 sides here, and then there's an end on each one. And so I can visualize that. It also, this was a DESI person 2 ago or so, Dr. Wesley Bird.
Oh, West?
Yes. He said that those things were very important in things like dentistry, and where they have to visualize what's going on. And I used to say, there was another thing he used to tell me, and I'd say, so we have to make every kid a dentist in this kid in Missouri, you know? But I mean, but he said, he pointed out for like architecture, of course, and for dentistry, and there were a number of things that he said it was very important for them to see that.
And the connection I had was someone came in and talked to middle school students from manufacturing, and now so much is robotic and it comes out flat and then folds up, that, the net.
Yeah, I
It's
think,
very
yeah, I agree. I think that it's important for them to understand what they're doing when they're finding surface area. And part of that understanding is, when do you ever need to find surface area? Why would we do this? So there's a context, which I'm sure you can speak to, the importance of being able to connect that mathematics to a context, so it's useful.
What you're saying is they should have the ability to mentally understand the image, but not necessarily move it around and manipulate it. Because you're saying
Well, I think
the transformation.
I think they get the ability to mentally do it from moving around. I mean, I'm talking about the nets. Are you talking about transformation?
So what was your question?
So the question is, which is appropriate, it's appropriate to do the visualizations and understand all the sides that you can't see, but we don't need to change it into another shape and understand that surface area stays the same even if you change the shape. That's a step too far.
I mean, you change the location. Yeah, is that what you're saying?
Oh, I think the transformation, I think it's the
yes.
mathematical transformation that we're talking about is like the slide flip turn, so the.
That you take it out and move it
On a
around.
coordinate grid.
Here it's 2 dimensional. So here
Okay.
just with flat, just sliding it, or you know, and that connects to symmetry. But that's not what you're talking about.
No, I'm just trying to understand what part of 639 is the step too far. Because I kind of agree with Nancy that this doesn't seem that challenging.
Yeah, I think to me, it's not, it's that there's already plenty here. I think the transformation is too much in 6th grade. That's my opinion. There's too many things.
But I do agree with Julie that number 9 is okay with the nets and stuff.
Yeah,
It relates to the 1 through 5, or 1 through whatever.
And 7's probably okay, it's really 6 and 8 that are pushing, I
on
think that's what we're saying, right?
Well, for me, 7 goes with the transformations, just for me. You're right, in elementary school, sometimes they do basic things with symmetry or things. But I would guess that at sixth grade, that would go a little deeper, at least if I were teaching it would, and it would be more along the lines of the
In connection with the transformation.
Well, it says
Yeah, and I
rotation
get that.
symmetry, yeah.
I feel like those symmetry things are taught prior to fifth grade, at least.
Well, and that's one thing that we really, yeah, is that we're gonna assume that those probably are, but those are some things we need to, we talked about articulation between K-5 and the 6-12 group, that we need to make sure that we're not making decisions assuming something's getting done in K-5, and it's not. So that would be our list. If we do that, we wanna make sure to converse with the K-5 group about symmetry. Because I agree that I'd rather than focus on so many different ideas and things, have a really good focus on a few things and do a really, really good job of it so that you don't have to reteach it again. And those things can be put together, because I like the way you guys were talking about putting those pieces together.
You know, and I think in what we have right now, in Missouri Learning Standards, that fourth grade introduces symmetry,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yes,
But it's not to the depth that I would expect this to be.
no, it's the number of lines of symmetry.
It's not
It's not
rotational symmetry.
Types of symmetry.
Right.
At
That's
fourth grade.
sort of my overarching question and everything is the goal to write the standards to be mastery, that everything we put on here is at mastery level, or some of it's exposure?
Well, if it's going to be assessed at this level, I mean, because really when we think about this, these are what they're gonna write assessments from. So we have to think about it, if they're gonna be writing assessments to this level. I don't know about anybody else, but would you assume that we would know by the end of this grade if they were gonna be assessed on this item, that it would be at a mastery level? Is that kind of our assumption that we're
When
working
I
on?
write standards, I think of them as mastery.
That's why I think it's important that we have less,
Mhm.
because,
I agree.
you know, there's a lot, even in the Massachusetts one here, there's a lot of do it here and then do it again here, do it again here kind of stuff. And the assumption, and that's the way standards were written in 2000, it's the
Yeah.
assumption that, because when this was first written, there was no every year assessment. So it was like, you know, when you got to this grade, they'll have all this, because they've seen it all these places. Well, now we need to really think about what do we want to focus on in sixth grade, as opposed to all the things we want to bring up.
Right, because it seems like there's a lot of touching on
Yes.
this and touching on.
That's right.
Which school districts in the curriculum can do. I mean,
Yeah,
that
sure.
would be that's actually the districts to make that decision, to know, we need to go more in depth if this is what's gonna be assessed at seventh grade and sixth grade. It's our choice as to whether we introduce these concepts here or there. This is where it's gonna be assessed. That's where districts writing their own curriculum and local control really comes in. This is where we're assessing things. It's not saying that you can't introduce things at a different time, but this is where they're gonna be assessing, because that's the local control of the districts too.
Well, and it goes back to the idea of whether this is the floor, or we're writing to the
Right.
floor, or we're writing to the ceiling.
Mhm.
And, you know, this is the basic that every sixth grader, and obviously,
When you say every sixth grader, we know that every sixth grader.
well, I put it down sooner, so, okay,
Yeah.
we
So,
got- I get that.
yeah, so that we are assuming that the majority of our sixth graders should be able to master. Because I had kids that couldn't remember to write their names on their paper, so to say every kid's gonna pass it is ridiculous. Okay, Julie?
Yeah, no, and I know that we don't wanna get bogged down too much in the assessment either, but it is a right point for us to keep in mind. And so at least, you know, it reminded me, so we do test every year, yes, but that's in flux too, you know, right now it's fifth grade is that, you know, we'll just say full on test. And then sixth grade is gonna be a 30-minute math test, and, you know, and of course, nobody knows exactly what
It's
that's
an
gonna look like.
untimed test. Yeah.
But, you know,
Who
that
knows?
it's, the material's gonna be
I agree.
adjusted.
But I think it's a philosophical thing to go
Right.
beyond the assessment. That is,
Right.
do we want students to do we want to go in depth and have students master, or do we just want to throw things at them?
Yeah.
And I think that's the progression that's happened with standards as they've been written over the last 25 years. Is we're trying, because you know, this is the thing I heard from teachers with GLEs, which were a tack on to the Show Me standards because we had to have grade level competencies, but, you know, GLEs have this huge list of things and we can't do any of it in depth. And so, you know, that's the Common Core. That's one of the good things they've done is they try to say we're going to do in depth at this grade level. And I think that's a model we need to really consider because I think teachers appreciate that, but I think more important, it's important for students that they have that understanding and not just have things thrown at them, topics thrown at them at each grade level.
Yeah,
Hoping
as
that
long
by
as
the third year it sticks.
And it's more at the earlier grades, as long as the in-depth is not an exercise of frustration for the kids of writing stories about why is 2 + 2 4, and I mean, I see my kids as it's very frustrating, and I think that 6 through 12, hopefully we're not really looking at a lot of that stuff, but what does in-depth mean?
Of course, I mean, when you say that, and I understand what you're saying, because there's definitely some of that goes on, but, you know, I have students who are frustrated because they think what I'm doing isn't worth their time. They don't know what's worth their time yet, you know what I mean? I mean, there's frustration doesn't always mean it's not worth their time on the part of the student. Now, usually it's not the student, it's the parents are frustrated in elementary school, you know, and I understand that too, but, and I'm not saying that that doesn't go on, I'm just saying sometimes there are things we need to do to build context that seem like they have nothing to do with the math, but they really do have to do with math.
And that might be the need for clarification and or examples, because again, sometimes how it's interpreted is different from building A to building B. So if we can provide the intent of that standard.
And it also goes back to what we think and what the textbooks that they choose to use, they, you know, what they're trying to sell is sometimes it's interpreted as being the standard, but it's really not the standard. That's the way the textbooks already have their books written. You know, companies already have things written that way, and so they're just saying it's tied to the standard when it's really a very broad interpretation of that standard. So I agree with you, we need to be careful about that. So are we, any other questions about geometry, a discussion about geometry?
I'm ready to roll for measurement, Katie.
Okay. Great, okay, let's take, it's 10:35, do we agree that we can take like a 10-minute break and be back? At 10:35? It is just halfway, they're both, well, it's also set on the other side.
Where you came up the elevator.
There's also
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
other side. So, shall we come back at 10:45? Does that sound reasonable? So it was really nasty driving. Which road did you come down?
I came across my friend.
Oh, that's right.
And, right. I got a number for 1:20 or something. And it was no idea.
And they swapped out. And you just look at somebody else's.
Let me figure out why our
Because everybody's looking.
Because I've got it down.
I was worried when I knew you were coming. I think you probably got second, but I hope you, because you know when that happens, other accidents every year. So I'm glad you're here. Glad you made it.
You know, I left the house on six.
Certainly not an excuse, that's good.
Every time I leave really, really early, it's sometimes I'm late because you get stuck. in
Right,
traffic.
but then I told myself, you know, if I'd gotten along earlier, it might.
It was my
I
did. It was horrible. I was worried about this.
I'm gonna go, what's up? I'm gonna get something to drink. Seems like they're doing this and that conversation that's going on. I'm sure they are. Feel free to jump in.
We didn't.
You know what, I knew mine was still in charge. Why don't you pull out the white one and plug yours in? Because mine's fully charged and I'm really not. So I can turn it off. You can unplug the white one and plug yours in.
Well, I just had to do it's like it was just dragging. It was I did just a little bit ahead of it, but I didn't just come back.
You don't like to drive.
I don't like driving. No, I don't like driving. I couldn't see what I was getting the car to race. You know?
Well,
you're a wise woman. I love.
Yeah, this whole sure though.
That was
Yeah. Smart woman, Jen.
I was gonna come to you. I would come to you.
Thank you very much.
Well, you know,
oh, wow.
we have a lot of space.
So you're gonna eat here before you go over to, or do you have to eat over at Jefferson?
I was gonna go eat at Jefferson. I parked over at the Hopper. I think it's the full. I couldn't get in, so I'm gonna stay next week.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna take sort of comfort.
I can't remember which one Grace said.
Comfort
Hilton.
soup.
It's
Yeah,
not
but
the same.
they're right next to, they're owned and operated by the same individuals.
I like your shoes.
Well,
I've been looking, I had to wear something like that, and then they worn.
wasn't fair, I was like, wondering.
No, not afraid to know I'm gonna be able to.
Hey, Myra? No wonder I didn't see you last night. I kept thinking, where's Myra?
You all are starting to.
Must be a liability.
That's the plan.
July
No.
That's the plan, we'll see how it goes.
We're gonna be like in there a while, and I'm allergic to all this stuff.
Oh, we are.
It's a lot easier.
You guys moved. No, they're in Jefferson.
I know, I
They're
did.
in Jefferson.
Oh.
Yeah, we go back to Jefferson next time.
And they're so good.
Jefferson.
Next time.
Okay.
Oh, you are or we are?
We are on the first floor of Jefferson.
Which one's Jefferson?
That's
That's
the
where we'll
big bear in front of it. It's down the hill from the government building.
I like the governor's building, just because you can park and just be right
Yeah,
out of
and
it.
that's where I parked this morning because if it continues to rain in Jeff City, that parking lot down there flips.
I saw that.
Or does it for when
Yes.
going on
Yeah, because I,
Missouri?
yes,
24?
yes.
I parked in lot 12. Is that
No, I parked in 24.
right? 12 is right by the creek.
No, 24, I don't know where 24
My
is.
part is
Okay.
because I had to cross the
So
bridge.
you think I need to go
Yeah,
move my vehicle?
Well,
But then if the
if we
hotel,
have
they have
continuous
signs saying
downward
our
flood,
parking
yeah,
garage
it's
floods.
raining more.
It's like,
So I don't know, no, that parking lot floods.
It's full.
Well, the other thing that floods is
I
the
was looking at
Catholic
elevator
classes.
stairs up to the fifth
Like they
floor.
have an underground.
Because that was as far as it would go. And then I went to a lady who worked there.
Underground.
And
Rains
she
goes
was
a lot of
like,
it.
today,
Worried if I need to go move my truck.
so we need to go up those stairs. So
Because I
Oh,
saw the tree.
it's rough.
I was thinking about like,
Yeah.
it's all the yeah, we do extend by the
So, no, and then I thought,
What did you say?
if there was gonna be hail this afternoon.
I'm done plugging these around.
Or we can move.
I can move mine back there and scratch up, you can plug it. And yeah, and I can go probably move mine too. This might be more
Oh, so they go
Yeah.
this way and then around this drive?
No.
In front of the
No,
car?
they're in the garage already. Yeah. No, they just go there and then they start.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yeah. That's what Melody says.
I read time of them.
A lot of the times with the she parks up in the garage. And she says that she likes to walk in the garage because it's other sides.
Yeah. So there's nothing that's
Those of you with the sweet tooth, peanuts.
But we just don't have we don't have you should not have Yes.
And then they put it in the order of yes, then this, then this, then
And
this,
that
then
is
this.
one activity but he had to wait to support it's like a whole so when I got so somebody yeah, and the next person who's their name get some hilarious state yeah, so I'm all for that and I might need to go back and do business parallel lines that okay, so that's coming in.
There was
I saw them. Okay, so like she gave one son, so my folks will tell me that the vertical one is something.
Yeah, and we got a lot of the one across.
Yeah, but it's 120,000 across from it. No. I mean, because it's across from it. So I never got to rest. I just told that. That's what so all the assignments.
I mean, she said she has a lesson, so I still.
Okay, I think we have about 1 minute until we're gonna get started, it's almost 10:45. So if we could all kind of get that, and Nancy, thanks for bringing snacks.
That was my husband
Oh.
emailing. I said, it's teachers, get some stuff.
Tell your husband, thanks for the snacks.
And I know you parents like stuff too.
We all like stuff.
If you have other suggestions you want to get next month, tell us. He's pretty good guy.
Shall we give him our grocery list of what we would like?
He could do it.
Yes, I think he probably would. He did an excellent job this time. I need to say what he did on this. Exactly. You know me well. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started, and we can. David came in here, so David, if you would be so kind to introduce yourself, because I know we have some new folks here. So if you would introduce yourself.
Right. David Richner. I currently teach my day job at the Warrensburg Area Career Center, Integrated Academics. I do math, comm arts, and some physics with nursing and the construction and the automotive and so forth program. I also do some adjunct at State Fair Community College. I've had a design construction business for a lot of years, and I've taught high school math, taught building trades, taught drafting CAD. My wife and I have 4 kids, one in college, one in high school, one in middle school, and one in elementary school.
Who was that?
There you go.
There's lots of boards, that's kind of scary. Is that what?
That's kind of a synopsis.
So we're glad you're here. I'm glad you made it, and I think that I just want to say that I think you've done a really good job so far this morning, and we've made some good progress. So if we can get back on track and start talking about, we finished, I think, with, are we done with the geometry? Any other discussion on Massachusetts geometry? So Nancy, you sounded like you were ready to go for measurement. Are there any objections to move the measurement? Look at that. Okay, then let's look at measurement.
Only 7, however, I have some concerns with it. Okay. Concern, well, one thing I like, I'm glad that they included, proportional relationships here. I think it should be beyond, measurement, however. I think it should go, it doesn't have to just be measurement. I think we should be discussing proportional relationships. And I think that keeping it simple so that they truly get the idea of a ratio and going all through it and everything else, is really important in keeping this with whole numbers, introducing unit rate, doing things like that, expanding it a little more, but it doesn't have to be just measurement, is my personal opinion. Then we can connect it to, we can have a separate thing like the Common Core does and say ratio and proportion, or we can connect it to number sense, even if we don't want to use that word, or we can connect it to, not number sense, but maybe expressions and equations or something.
She's okay with number 6, it's number sentence.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I think she would.
yeah, it's number
How
7.
did she have a problem with number
No,
sense?
no.
Number sentence.
Okay, I'm right here. Alright, okay.
So what you're saying here is about by ratios and proportional reasons,
So
not
3
just keep it within that. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
3 I don't think should be kept just within measurement. I think we should expand that and make sure that it is put in another arena as well, maybe in the algebra one or expressions and equations or whatever we call it.
Right, whatever. we
So I
decide.
would like to expand that. Can I go on or should I actually give someone else a chance to talk? Yeah.
Well, I think I think you probably looked in, several of you looked in probably more carefully at our middle school teachers. I really value people that have actually taught middle school to be able to give their input. So Tiffany, do you have anything?
Well, I was wondering, and I haven't taught 5th grade, so you guys have taught 5th grade, can you help me? On 6M1 where it says apply formulas where appropriate, but before that it was talking about applying the concepts of perimeter and area to the solutions of problems. I thought I saw somewhere complex. Did I not see complex shapes? Oh, it's
Complex is
6M4.
our 4.
6M4, sorry. I assumed that would be a complex shape made up of simpler shapes like rectangles and triangles. Would that be something that 5th grade, developmentally 5th grade could do? Or is that, should be in 6th grade, because it's the first time that it's addressed?
My opinion is that they get those rectangle sounds really, really nicely. And they know about area as versus perimeter, and they get it, and they understand it, and it's solid in their mind. We can sail with them with triangles and parallelograms because triangles are half a parallelogram. And that, I think instead of saying complex shapes, I think the word composition of those are that's a better term, but we can work on, terminology later. But I think that it says find areas of triangles and parallelograms. That was good in 4. And then a separate one for me would be the composition of those shapes.
I like the word composition, very much, as opposed to complex, which is something different, so,
Yeah, that's
a good one.
Yeah, it is.
Kind of complex, and we kind of,
What
is that?
Yeah. So composition of shapes, I think, is really good terminology use, because I think it's something we want our kids to know as well as our teachers to be able to know what that means.
Another question I would have is to kind of get your feel of it. We've talked a little bit about formulas and, knowing where formulas came from and things like that. Would this be a situation where you would expect the kids to have the formulas memorized? Or would it be given? Because in GLEs it was given. Now a lot of them are not. Which,
For me, I think that they should get a conceptual understanding. Right now, we're talking about rectangles, triangles, parallelograms. If they got the rectangle down, and for me, that would be an earlier grade. And in 6th grade, you get the parallelogram and you get the triangle, I don't think you have to give them a formula. I think that they should understand those shapes. Now, if we're saying from the area of a regular polygon up to 12 sides or something, yeah, that would need something. But for what we're talking about right now, if we make it so broken down into just those 3 shapes, and it's so conceptual, I don't think they need formulas, and I think it would build a better groundwork for when they move on to higher grade levels, and then they'll understand.
So, I might be just getting with the program here, but circles would be an exception to that. Circles say we can get a formula.
I haven't introduced that.
Although, yeah, I mean, you can do conceptual things with that, but otherwise, I agree. I don't think we want to clutter their heads with formulas.
We did way too many.
But you would expect them to know that the diameter is twice the radius of a circle and not get a formula.
That,
Yeah,
sure.
that would
Yeah,
actually be.
I think that you might, I personally don't think that they should be finding circumferences in areas of circles.
Okay.
You can discuss terminology. The reason I don't even agree with completely, I'm not satisfied with where it is in the Common Core. Because when you start talking about that stuff, you're talking about an irrational number. And a kid to understand an irrational number of pi, first of all, what is that thing, when you see it's the letter, it's the Greek letter, it stands for this. That is a wild concept for kids. So I personally, in 6th grade, am still sticking with rectangles, triangles, parallelograms, and getting that area thing down. I would not introduce circles until at least 7th grade, as far as finding
Circumference and area.
Yes.
That's what I was thinking of.
if you want to talk about this is a radius or this is a diameter or even a chord, just or a tangent, or just throw some little words in there. I don't think it should necessarily be a standard, but to find the actual circumference and area, I
agree.
So what grade,
When you
what
say
grade,
seventh
grade. She said
Seven.
I would move that to at least 7th
what
grade.
it is in Common Core 7th, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And my concern with that even is, I think Common Core doesn't discuss irrational numbers till 8th grade, but you talked about pi in 7th
Yeah,
grade.
it's true.
And so, if you're talking about it with kids, you want them to really understand it, and I don't think they're conceptually ready at 6th grade. It's my opinion.
Yeah, and I do. I think those are great notions, and I'm just looking at it from a little bit later on in kids' lives. When I ask them when they are, sophomores, when it comes up, or juniors even, what's the definition of pi? They don't know.
0.14, yeah.
Right, and I'm just like, no. And they're like,
Nailed it.
Miss Kay, are you gonna celebrate Pi Day? I know, certainly am not, because it's not March 14th, it's not 3.14. Are you kidding me? No, but at some point I may have to say, that I will bring food that day if they learn the definition.
2004, March 2015, because
Yeah,
Yes.
3.1415.
But that's still not the end of it, so, yeah.
No, you would go at the hour, at the minute.
So I do think that's something that, and I don't wanna get into curriculum at all, I wanna be standards, and I get it, but, I don't know I think that's know the definition of pi, isn't that fair?
Yes.
But obviously you can't do that until you're gonna do that with irrational numbers, yeah.
Yeah, I think the philosophy here was that in this one and in Common Core, you do it when you master the area. But I agree with it, I think it doesn't make sense either.
Yeah, because they have to
And the
understand
other thing is,
direction.
I think it's tough enough for kids to find the area of something when it's a partial
Yeah.
square, because they
Yes.
want to literally have the whole square in there when they begin. And you start them out with rectangles, and most of the time they fit nicely, and then sometimes you'll have fractional sides, and so we have to get the idea of that. And so when you go to a triangle, something that is not at a right angle, that's tough enough for kids.
Yes.
But then you go to a circle, to me, that's the next step, that's the next level.
And they confuse perimeter and area enough
it
the way
is.
that it is, and then all of a sudden you throw in another one, oh no, that's circumference, it doesn't have perimeter, it's circumference, then they get confused again. And the other issue I see with putting circles in too early is because then they tell you pi is 3.14, you cannot convince them that it's anything else, it is 3.14. And then my algebra students, I'm like, why didn't you divide by pi? Well, I divided by 3.14, that's not divided by pi. And they do not understand it, because
And
it's
it
3.14.
doesn't just stop there, it goes all the way through calculus and all the way through.
Does
It doesn't stop, so yeah, I agree.
But we also need to realize there are ramifications to moving that 8th grade, that is, you can't really talk about prisms anywhere close to where you're talking about coming to cylinders, when you talk about rectangular prisms, I mean, you have to wait to do that, you can't do that.
And so that's why I said 7th grade maybe, because you can at least introduce the idea of the simple pi is just this ratio. And then really explore it in depth when you get to 8th grade. But in 6th grade, I would say no.
I agree.
The other one I had a concern with on this page, I'm not sure about the value of number 7. Find the sum of the angles and simple polygons of the 8 sides with and without measuring the angles. I'm not sure what the value of finding the sum of the measures of the angles of the 7-sided polygon is. What do you think?
I was wondering the same thing.
Yeah,
We've done it for a long time.
Just because of the ACT, that's it.
And this is, this is 6th grade.
Well, I know, but I mean, is that why they started that concept though, to get them, because that's all over ACT.
It is there, and I don't mind it being put, and I'm not sure where I would put it, to be honest with you, but I don't know that.
It
High
does,
school geometry, I think is soon enough.
I mean, it can be connected in terms of the way you present it with the idea of composing and
diagonals.
decomposing. You know, any polygon can be divided into so many triangles. I mean, it does connect to that idea of composing and decomposing, but
And I don't think it's maybe that important enough a topic to address a standard, especially at a 6th grade level. Is that kind of what you're saying, that something isn't an idea that we may do?
it's really just a part of properties of polygons, isn't it?
In a unit of measurement, on measurement.
Yeah, I don't, well, I mean, that's the whole measurement thing.
Yeah.
This
It's
is
in
all
measurement.
geometry. But I mean, there is,
Kind of a fine line
The other thing
between
that's
measurement and
nice is-
geometry.
Well, there's the measurement of geometry, and then there's the measurement of measurement, so it's like there's almost two.
well, but there's no
Well, and I
measurement of measurement in here.
That's what I'm saying.
There's one on 6 and 3 that talks about same system unit conversions.
Yes, but that's
okay.
the proportional reason that she said that she wanted to look at that beyond that, but that's really the only one.
Well, and for 7, I really do think they should know, boy, I'm maybe contradicting myself here, I do think they should know for triangles and for rectangles.
Yeah.
I don't think that you have to know up to 8 sides, I guess is my thought. You have to know.
Well, that's why I
you have
said
to know
it's
some
really
of
part of the
angles.
properties of triangles. I mean, that's one of the properties of
Yeah.
triangles and rectangles. I mean, it's part of what makes a rectangle a rectangle.
But is that something that you use in upper level? I mean, because I teach it, but do my kids use it other than when they're trying to find a missing angle for a triangle or a rectangle? No. But do they use it in upper math?
Use it anything else.
You know, triangles are the big ones, so boy, they need to understand triangles. Any other stuff? I mean, it's not that you don't use it, but, you know, do people have it memorized by the time they get way up? I would think not.
So maybe if you keep in mind that concept of mastery, is it necessary to master up to 8 sides?
Well, and I think what you guys have said, the triangles and the rectangles are really important at that grade level. But I think I agree with when you're saying up to 8 sides, is that really that important at that level? And can it be something that you expand upon later? but it's not meant you have to know now.
Right. I know, when I'm just thinking through, so if you did, obviously you would do it for triangles, I think, and then you would do it for four-sided, because that's such a big part of what you're doing.
Quadrilaterals, yeah.
And then, so is there a value in going on to 5-gons just to have it be something that they're recognizing that there's a progression, but not continuing on with 6, 7, 8 because that becomes tedious. Is that kind of what we're asking?
I was asking where the limit would be, but honestly, I guess if we wanna go to 8, we can, because I honestly see a value in 6. The reason I see the value in 6 is, that's the last time also that your equilateral triangles will, you know.
If you're going to 6, you might as well go to 10.
All right, so I want to expand this. 137.
I mean, this is
Only if
what,
you come teach that unit for me.
this is a good example of where, when you said that, I'm sitting there thinking of whatever in any higher level math class you ever use that. And the only things I can think of are, I can prepare my teachers who take the practice test, because there's always a question on the practice test like that. ACT has questions like that. You know, all this Mojia probably does, I don't know yet, but I mean, all the standardized test stuff, they love those kind of questions, but I just think we did not like to use it.
I do think it's important to have 3 and 4 in there. If you want to go up to 8, okay, I'm not teaching anymore anyway.
Well, I could see that value in 5, and now that you've enlightened me, I think I agree with you as to 6. I mean, at any point is gonna become arbitrary, but also, if you do go too much, then it does become, memorization, and that's not gonna stick to kids very well, you don't think, it doesn't seem to. So maybe we stop at 6, and maybe that's just I don't know.
And then in geometry expand, or another grade level expand to.
In high school geometry, yes, because they're gonna do some other things with,
Which would be then prepared for the ACT test and all the other standardized tests. I think, because I mean, what kid coming out of 6th grade is going to be tested on it?
I think the other thing that I had in mind, even though I know we're not supposed to, seems to me that when you write a standard and then you get a group of educators together to write assessment questions, they want to find the trickiest way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those
Which is
questions,
not what
so
we're after.
how many 7-sided ones would we have?
so we need to keep those people on the defensive stuff, because I am there.
I think the 6 makes sense because of, and again, what you said with the reasoning, I think that makes sense. 7 and 8 and on makes no sense at all in 6th grade whatsoever.
I would have never thought that.
What, the 6?
I mean, I just see that, and I think, of course, we've always done that. I think we just didn't get it.
What about on, number 2, the construct? We're going up in 6th grade, and I don't have any idea, I'm curious, how much construction do you do?
I don't know what they do in 5th and 6th grade as far as how much construction they do, but I know that my 7th graders still do not know how to use protractors. I mean, I know they use them, but they are not sufficient with them at all. I could give them a 45-degree angle and they'll tell me that it's 135. Or 40, or, because they don't know where to line it up, whether they're lining it up down here.
Well, I'm even curious what are they talking about constructing things with a compass?
No,
I don't think they are either, so I'm curious what they mean.
I would,
I think they're talking about drawing.
yeah, just like a
I don't think they're talking
35-degree
about construction.
angle.
Because I don't know anybody that does construction in 6th grade.
I don't know, that's what I'm asking.
So I think you're talking about using tools to draw the angle, but not to construct the angle.
Yeah,
So maybe
that's
we need to
true.
change the vocab up there.
Yes.
Another thing we need to keep in mind with the angles is I know that we had talked about, the fact that, well, we would probably just have to graph it. Circle graphs and pie graphs are currently missing, and they would have to know how to do that with those circle graphs, so maybe that's it.
And I do think those should be included. I saw that in the discussion that was had, last week, when
They're missing.
when I was missing in the afternoon, that was talked about.
Right. Yeah, they've got to be there. And we don't know if it's going to be 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, or if it's going to be something they include in 5th grade, but whatever we do. But if we put it in sixth grade and we haven't talked about circles,
It's a little hard.
then maybe, yeah, so we'll have to think about where is a good place to put that, where it's conceptually, the kids will really understand what we're doing.
You could probably
That's
lead
true.
them
Yes.
with that or interpret them.
Yeah, and they're all
Before.
gonna know that shape, of course, they're gonna, if you hold up a disc, they're gonna say that's a circle. And then somewhere, you're gonna define circle to be the perimeter of the disc. So you're setting kids up for confusion, no matter what, and you're not gonna fix that, cause everybody's gonna teach our preschoolers that a
Yeah.
disc is a circle.
Yeah.
But when you are talking about doing these graphs showing proportions and things like that, the circle graphs, I don't think you have to talk about the, and this is a question, but the area or the perimeter, I mean, if you're really just trying to create proportions.
Because you could do the angle measurement, because that might tie in with what we're talking about here with drawing the angle measurements in the circle, so.
Well, yeah, because you
Yeah.
still, you've got your 360.
So you're kind of maybe tying those things together if you bring it in.
My idea before I was slapped down by Dr. McCallum was,
Wild Bill?
yes,
Yeah.
Was that it fit more naturally in seventh grade when you do talk about area of circles. And to me, that's where you would extend ratios and proportions to include unit rates that involve fractions. So you're expanding on their basic knowledge of ratios in the sixth grade, and you've got them set, and they know what a unit rate is, and they've worked with them, and they've worked with this area stuff. And then in seventh grade, when you introduce this circle, you can introduce ratios and to use that to build the circle graph. Sounds like I'm on the soapbox. Anyone who's ever been with me in the last couple of years about my circle graphs.
Yeah,
even
she has to.
at state meetings when the math supervisors would come in and say, what about circle graphs? You know, but I just think that it's
real life.
it's everywhere. You open the newspaper, I don't see too many, not a whole lot of them, but I do see circle graphs, you know, and so I see it in seventh grade when you start introducing that circle and introducing that area.
So it's sixth or seventh grade that we agree that circle graphs are gonna go in someplace. Okay, that's, that has to.
I kind of like seventh grade.
Just an overarching thing about measurement that we're gonna have to just to think about is, do we want a standard of measurement? And that is, there are things, I was looking back at geometry, there are lots of things in there that are actually measurement.
Yeah.
And so, that's kind of when you look at Common Core, you have to find measurement because it's inside of everything else.
Right.
And so you either put some of it here and then have it other places, or should we just not have one that's measurement and put these into other things? Because they're all geometry except one. Really.
Measurement gets kind of confusing, is this the geometry measurement, or like what Anna's saying, measurement?
And I know why it's here, because in 2000, that's
where
that
it was, yeah, that's where the
principles
principles
and
and standards,
standards
that's where it
so-
was, yeah.
but I don't know if it's necessary to have a separate measurement strand.
Yeah, and that's something I think we more have, I agree. Jill?
Yeah, I think we should talk even more broadly, more generally than that, about the categories. Because I didn't find either of the two systems of what we've looked at, so far to make sense the way that, the way that all of this makes sense inside my head is a little different than either, so, I think we should have that conversation in a general way.
I agree.
And I agree with Bob's point as to the specific as well.
I also feel, I like what Steve said about the, number 2, and that this may have been back in geometry, but I wanna make sure that we are putting those shapes, I'm sorry, it is back in geometry in G4, where it sort of talks about it. I wanna make sure that we're putting those shapes on the coordinate plane, not just drawing.
Right.
Yes.
But making sure we're identifying the vertices with coordinates and things.
Not just points, like it says here.
Correct.
Yes.
So I want to involve that drawing, not construction necessarily, but drawing on the coordinate plane, so we're having those kids identify the vertices and
That's
labeling
really-
things properly.
That's really important, and that's quite often when you have kids even in high school try to do that, they struggle with that. So I think putting it on a coordinate plane is a great idea.
Also on, number 2, where it talks about identifying, measuring, and classifying angles, acute, obtuse, and right, what about reflex?
Reflex angles.
Would you introduce reflex angles, or would that be in with this group, or would that be farther on?
From teaching it, how well does that just completely freak out a 7th grader, or is it, can they handle that, or?
I think, well, I kind of wanted to see what you I think it's easier to explain once they know that there's 360 degrees in a circle.
Yes.
Because I could say, okay, well, we know it's from here all the way around is this, so how do I figure out what it is just from here to here?
Yes.
So I think it fits better after we've gone with circle problems, but I don't know what you guys think.
That makes sense. Is that because if we really focus on circles with circle graphs, everything we're talking about possibly in 7th grade, that maybe that makes sense to put it there. I don't know. Nancy.
And that even connects to
Yeah.
transformation, notation.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Which
really
you
does.
said,
Very nicely.
I just think if that's where we're gonna put it, and we're gonna do acute, obtuse, right, what about straight here, then when we do wanna make sure that they do reflex, I think we need to make sure we mention it.
And so when we talk about it, again, which is identify, measure, describe, classify, and draw various angles, we need to let teachers know what that means.
Which one?
Yeah, which ones do we expect them to know by the end of this grade level? They need to be able to do. There are others, and yes, we're going to do them, but not at this grade level.
Because I think straight is appropriate at that point too. I mean, they can see the full 180 degrees on the protractor. It forms a straight line, and you can get into some good conversations about that, but much sense.
Well, no, I think that's good. I think we need to clearly define what they're responsible for at that grade level. They'll be responsible for all of them eventually, but at that grade level, that's what they're responsible for.
And I think they know what degree is before this. They know about an angle. You know, so extending that to a circle, they're gonna know what a circle is. I just don't think they should be measuring area and perimeter or circumference.
Right, but do they already know that there's 360 degrees in a circle? Or is that just something that you tell them and they don't? I guess it depends
Well, I mean,
on.
that's actually one of the ways that I use to develop the sum of the interior angles is 180. Is to use the idea of walking around it, and you've made you turn completely around, that's 360. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's okay. I mean, I think that concept is attainable, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I could see protractors together.
We can do that too.
That's true.
I just-
180, oh.
360.
You can put one around those too.
Sure,
And use
sure.
Oh, yeah.
compasses.
Sure.
Those are the ones I use. 'Cause
Yeah.
I just had at one point in my life this idea that I didn't want my kids having sharp objects in the room. So I bought these little circle ones. Yeah, and I ended up liking them.
I did.
So that's what I
I like
thought.
Yeah, I like it.
So with that connection,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was,
So I think that's appropriate.
It doesn't matter to me, I just think that we should make sure it and
That it's safe.
specify, because otherwise we've got too much variety.
Right, so being specific, and it gives teachers guidance too, so they don't, because sometimes when you read, it doesn't matter what document, and it says this, like you were saying, solving linear equations, what we're talking about there, oh my gosh, that could be like, yeah, exactly. So giving some more specificity about like this time you're expecting to have mastered this concept, yeah, I think that'll help a lot.
It seems like in 4th grade in the current standards that we're using, that they're drawing points, lines, line segments, rays, and angles. And it says, I think, of certain sizes, so they must be talking about their measure.
Did you go back to 4th grade?
She's
That's
stepping
where
out
I
of her
belong.
boundaries again, just bring it girls. Any other questions about measurement?
Where do they actually learn how to read a ruler?
Never.
I bet you like that.
I would love to.
Where do they
Even
go to
looked at
that?
it. Yeah, the real, yeah.
One day I was thinking
We're
about
still
it.
working on this senior.
Yes.
I should say that's graduates.
I mean, isn't it, I mean, I completely get what we're talking about.
Point, you know, to give them.
Is that in the Common Core somewhere?
I don't know
So
if
in this
specifically
document
says
somewhere.
that.
Hang on.
In this document, there's, I just searched ruler,
Okay.
see, it's in grades 1 to 2.
Uh,
This is, learning standards, it says, select and correctly use the appropriate measurement tool, ruler, balance scale, but it says appropriate,
And-
use the appropriate, but it doesn't say use appropriately.
Common
And I
Core
think-
is second.
But
Second grade.
But I don't think the kids really understand it until they understand fractions. And so now the Common Core document, we can like or dislike, but the one thing I love is that they're doing fractions they're teaching fractions on the number line.
Yes.
And so it's
It'll
really
start to look like.
and really pushing understanding where a fraction lies on the number line. I can only think that that's gonna help carry over to rulers, because I know what you're saying, because I taught a group of freshmen. I walked out the door one time and I said, if I ever have them use a ruler to measure again, just take me out and shoot me, because it was unbelievable about how they couldn't use a ruler. So I understand what you're saying.
They talk about
also
fractions on
here.
number lines here.
Up here
Yeah.
in third and again. in
Yeah,
second.
they
think
do,
it's
but I don't think it's the
different
same.
place.
But I really like that they're really,
Well, it's.
and I think that's one thing that we wanna communicate with our KP5 people, they do a lot of work with the number line, and we wanna make sure that they don't lose that integrity, understanding the number line as early age.
Dave wants to close it.
Yeah,
I wanna hear from Dave.
and you can go the other way with that. The juniors and seniors in high school that can't measure, that the construction teachers complain that they can't measure. I work with them, but I'm always trying to tie back to what they're working in learning in high school math class. And I take the ruler and we go the other way, we talk about how it compares to a number line.
Right.
And I use the ruler and we learn how to divide fractions using the ruler, we can
Yeah.
visualize some of that.
Right.
So you can, and we're not writing curriculum, I understand that. But there are lots of connections that can be made, which would help not forget, if you're doing things separately,
Right.
you're forgetting them. If you're keeping them together, you're gonna remember more of them because you're doing them.
Right.
That's my contention why
We have
so
a-
many
we
high
have a
school students can't do
focus.
it, because they haven't done it for several years.
Well, and not only they haven't done it, they can, you know, in the number line and fractions and all those things that you're talking about, they've memorized procedures, which is the most easily forgettable thing, and they don't have it tied to something.
Mhm.
And tying a fraction, tying what you're talking about, division fractions with a ruler, tying those things together, help
Did they-
kids remember.
I did some presentation this summer at the state career ed meetings for some teachers, and I used rulers to teach all kinds of things, and a bunch of them were very fascinated by
Yeah.
those connections.
Well, and working with elementary teachers and working with the number line and fractions, it's amazing the ahas I've had from elementary teachers that didn't know how to do things before, that when they tied it to a number line, these big ahas that they got, so.
I also think, I would have to double check, but I think that it's in science standards currently now too, because I know some of our science teachers
That's hard to
are
train.
teaching it as well.
So we have one left from Massachusetts, is that right, that we haven't talked about, the number of students in operations?
No.
Diagnosis.
Oh, diagnosis,
I got
too,
you.
I'm sorry.
Joking.
Well, I was at the beginning of
Don't
that,
skip personal preference.
but I'm starting at the beginning of that, so that's.
And remember, Julie said to not forget David too, didn't you, Julie?
Yeah, and also, you know, if you just have them measure everything in millimeters, you don't have to deal with fractions.
One of those metric numbers.
I have students when we measure things in millimeters, they still want to say 2.3. Like, how can you even see that?
Right, well, that's why I tell my physics kids, let's we're not doing that.
So, do we wanna talk about data next? And here's when I'm looking at my clock, it's like, I think 11:20. So, do we wanna talk about data next and then talk about number when we come back, because we might be able to get that before we
Yeah.
wanna.
Data's
dismiss it.
short. There's not
Data's a
much in
shorter group, and you're not seeing it.
there. Not much there. What page is that on, Nancy?
58.
One thing I noticed that is not here, all of these I6 instead of 7, 8, is box and whisker, and I would like at some point to discuss whether or not it's super important.
Circle graphs.
Circle graphs is in here.
Circle graphs is in here, and I like that.
Yes.
Well, I think, here's the thing about box and whisker. If these are your standards, probably not, but I like the 6th grade so much better than this one. And I know it's challenging, but again, the central idea, just like function is to algebra, the central concept of probability and statistics is variability. And there's really no variability in this. And in the Common Core there is, and that's really one of the reasons you look at the box plot is it shows variability. You've got measurement of interquartile range and range both right in your face. So that's what they're used for. So I think the answer to the box plot thing is, well, it depends. Do you want to talk about variability in 6th grade? And I think you do. I mean, I think it's even if it's just the way it is in Common Core, I think that's enough. Just to talk about difference from variability from center.
And I think
it's a way to show that.
Yes, right.
And I think kids understand that better sometimes than these adults, because I know box and whiskers was not even something that was around in elementary school. So, I think the more I understand about box and whiskers, the more I like a lot of the things and the components that it had. Because when I first looked at it, I go, what the heck is this?
The other thing is, it's a different kind of measurement of variability.
Right.
You know, when you talk about mean absolute deviation or standard deviation, that's using the mean as the center. But in a box plot, you're using the median as a center. So it's the non-parametric parametric thing, even though you wouldn't say that in 6th grade. But I mean, it's
And if you're comparing two sets,
Yes.
you
Yeah,
have
it's really
a
nice.
picture of both, so you can see the variance instead of just a number.
And I think that what's been happening in most schools, because a lot of teachers really don't understand it, is they're just giving them the rules rather than really understanding, explaining. And if I'm not mistaken, because Bob, I think you're more familiar, probably anybody in here with the Days document, this follows, what they have there pretty much follows what the Days document represents.
Which is the American Statistical Association
Yeah.
I think
guidelines.
that's the part that pure mathematicians are going to appreciate.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Well,
some won't. I mean,
Some
there's some
don't
pure
think-
mathematicians that don't like statistics. I think it's not even.
When
math.
we did a review of the document, we had people said they would not review the probability and statistics because that was not math.
Yeah.
So they just look at
Some
it.
of them think that way. But yeah, I mean, I'd just say that I think the criticism I've heard of this part in 6th grade Common Core is that it's not age appropriate. And I would say, if you're thinking of teaching it like you would in an introductory statistics course at college, you're absolutely right. But that's not that's where professional development happens, because it can be taught in an age appropriate way. And the point of it is that, as the Gaze document said, the key concept of statistics is variability. And so if you start talking about data and probability for 2 years before you ever bring up variability, you're missing the point. So you have to do something age appropriate at the beginning when you first talk about it.
Because our kids really struggle at the high school level of understanding probabilities too.
Yeah, and I would like to address that question as one of the things that, that I had made some notes to myself about. But I want to come back first, and to Tiffany's question, so I guess my comment here has 3 prongs. But first, as to the box and whisker, like the grade book program that we use at my school has a built-in box and whisker plot now. And of course, you know, I mean, I guess strictly speaking, we don't really need it, because if you're the math teachers anyway, you know, we all have all that stuff in our heads anyway, of course we do. So, but, you know, and then of course it was a little funny when, I guess it went into effect a year ago, but when the guys that were explaining that, you know, they didn't really know what it even was. You know, the guys that tell us what was really different in our grade book, like, we didn't already figure it out. But we would look at that and we're just like, we know what that is, and we're like, and not only do we know what it is, the kids know what it is. And so if you want to have a kid, they can look up their own, you know, grades too, but if you want to talk to them, you bring it up on your grade book, hit hide others, and it's got everything they do, and it's got the box and whisker plots for if you have like separate categories, it's got them shown separately, and so I think it actually is something, you know, of course, it's been on the Alpha 2 ESC still, maybe not this year, but so I always feel like that's not Alpha 2 level stuff, that's middle school, and they actually do learn it there, then we have to review with them right before the test, because who remembers everything, but so I feel like that box and whisker is something. I also, when you read, and I don't claim to be a statistician, but when you read, you know, information, very often, that middle 50%, now I see it more often called middle 50% than the interquartile range. However, I don't necessarily have a problem with that language, either. So I do think that's a good thing. I question, and this is a question I'm open to persuasion, but STEM and leaf, do we really still need that? And my final comment was to come back to this idea of statistical variability. I don't have a problem with the concept of that, but I think the way that this is written is very, very poor.
In which one?
In the Common Core, the statistical variability. And I know that when I went through the SBAC 6th grade questions, I was just appalled at the questions that appear to be trying to test this idea. I thought they were so ambiguous and so impossible, and I just worried about that. So my comment as to that, I know that you are, very pro stat in terms of that. Me too. So I don't think it's a problem to include it, but I think that the language needs to be cleaned up, and maybe.
I think it needs to be a lot better.
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
And so
the
the idea is there.
the idea of variability in terms of how do you see variability in graphs, I think that's the key, one of the key things to start with before you ever start calculating anything. Because I think you made a good point there, and that is, to me, one of the biggest things, any kind of graph or numerical measurement in statistics is we want our students to be literate.
Yes.
And we want them to be it's not as important that they can make all these, it's more important that they know what they say and they can read them. Because that's what's going to happen in the real world. And so part of that is making it to understand what it does. But I think with variability, the key is that I do this thing I teach statistics every semester. And the first day, we talk about variability, and we talk about how do you see variability in graphs. And I give them a bunch of histograms or bar graphs and say, look at here's like one of them is test scores for 2 classes. Which one has more variability? And when I do that with teachers, high school teachers, they start saying, well, I have to have the numbers to figure out the standard deviation. No, look at them. I want you to know what variability is. And that's what I think that's what they mean here, because when I read the progressions, that's the idea that comes out, but I agree, I don't think this description does it well.
Yeah.
Julia, your STEM
STEM and leaf.
Okay, yes, that was new to me. And until I actually saw a teacher do one, and then she turned the paper this way, and it looked like a very nice line plot, a bar, So it was just the way, and it was a quick way to organize.
It's a quick way to rank the data.
Yes,
Good job.
yes, and then, so once you do that, then you can see the most, when it was, are you with?
I know what it is.
Yeah. No, but I mean, it's
Yeah,
better.
no, I understand what you're saying.
And this way, it's like,
Rotating the paper.
oh
And
my
there's also-
gosh, it was such a quick visual.
There's also
So you like
value
that.
in when you organize data that way, it makes it much easier to talk about median and percentiles because it's already in order. It's automatically ordered for you there.
Right.
So I mean, it's a tool.
And it
It's a
seems
really
kind
good
of,
tool for the younger kids, I think.
Okay. And like,
it
I
seems
just-
pretty easy and quick to do for the for
when they
more.
don't struggle, and that was
No,
my,
no.
because we do a quick review and algebra 2 right before the test, because
Yeah.
it's, the fact that it's been on there has been obviously very highly annoying to me for some time now, like, I'm not hiding that, but, if it's helpful to middle school kids, then I'm happy with it. Please do take it out the algebra 2 test, thank you, but, I mean, I get it, I do see that it's
It's
a
a
quick,
visual.
compact way of ranking the data that doesn't take 5 sheets. of
It's
paper.
not one that you see in lots of places to be literate, except it's really more like, it'd be like, I think of it kind of like the quadratic formula. This is a tool that we use to do something, so I think it's
And I kind
valuable.
of find myself doing it more like after I've graded a set of papers, because
Oh,
I
you
just
do.
get that quick visual.
Yeah.
And it's an organizational tool.
Nancy, you had something that you?
I have a couple things.
No, I can't imagine.
One of them is that, I don't mind that stem and leaf's here. I think stem and leaf is particularly helpful if it's a double stem and leaf, and you're comparing 2 data sets.
Sure.
Otherwise, I think that I would use the more common term of like a dot plot or something like that, you know, so if you're gonna turn it sideways.
Right.
And the other thing that I don't see mentioned, and maybe it was mentioned somewhere else, are histograms.
Could have
And
been a
those,
lower grade level. And bar graphs.
I'm not sure, but I think that those seem to be, well, bar graphs, to me, are a little different, but histograms seem to be important for,
Very important. If you look below that, it's in the exploratory concepts and skills, but yeah, I agree. I think as far as statisticians go, that's the most important.
right. So I think it's important that we mention that over stem and leaf, quite honestly. But if we leave stem and leaf, well, whatever.
It's another representation.
Yeah. The other thing that I was wondering about here, even though there's just 4 of them, to me, the data and the plots or the circle graphs and all of that is a lot different than the probability.
Yeah.
And it seems that probability is going to involve a lot more with fractional ratios and things like that. And to me, that should kind of swing along so that we can really develop the idea of how we gather data, then how we represent data in 6th grade. So we're just talking about data, and we're just talking about gathering it, sampling, whatever we want to call it, and then representing it and analyzing with measures of centering, measure of variability, and maybe leave the probability for a little later.
Making they understand this really, really well, and then
And connect it to what you've gathered and what you've got and how you analyze it and represent it. And then move on to probability is a different part later, is my thought.
So in
Because
other
you do
words,
too much.
I mean, what you do is you do descriptive statistics.
You have to get all things in, don't you?
No, but I mean, you're describing data, that's what you're talking about in 6th
Yes,
grade. Then in 8th grade, you start to get into the theory behind how you would analyze it, which is probability theory. I mean, I think that makes perfect sense to do it that way.
So those were my comments. Mr. Fancy Pants will put it in words.
Put it in fancy words.
I agree with you.
Any other discussion about data and probability, data and statistics? Well, it is 11:35, so do you feel this is a good break point for lunch?
In this building.
In this building, yeah, and I believe the cafeteria is on the 4th floor.
Yes.
Okay, and the tickets are there, and the cafeteria is So, anyhow, how long do we want to take for lunch break?
Speak after at 12:30, no later.
Yeah, sounds good.
55 minutes. I mean, it's not that busy. Yeah, if we get down there now, I think that's a smart thing, though. We break before noon.